Section 2. Restack resources. 6. Start with a burst. You can restack resources on your leverage points by beginning with an intense and focused period of work. Start with a burst. 1. I was recently assigned the task by a spouse who shall remain nameless of installing a new host system for the vegetable beds, wrote the attorney Greg McLaughlin. As any DIer knows, there is an immutable law of the universe that one cannot acquire, in a single trip to Home Depot, all parts required for a project. It simply cannot be done. If you were assigned the task of replacing a single 60-watt light bulb, by the time you returned from Home Depot you would realize that a 61-watt bulb was actually needed, calling for a return trip to the store. McLaughlin went to Home Depot for his host system supplies, and sure enough, the immutable law held true. One of the hose splitters he'd bought had a leak, which rendered it useless. Until he could get a replacement, the hose system wouldn't work. He realized that the efficient thing to do would be to wait for his next Home Depot trip. It would likely be within a few days, anyway, and add the hose splitter to his shopping list, rather than make another special trip for one $2 part. But my wife didn't want me to be efficient, she wanted to be able to water the vegetables, wrote McLaughlin. My success or failure was judged by a single criterion: whether the vegetables could be gardened. Even though it was ludicrously inefficient, I got back into my truck and drove back to Home Depot, probably spending $3 of gas and $200 of my time in order to buy a $2 hose widget. Even though I did something inefficient to achieve my result, I was effective because I got the project done. McLaughlin realized the lessons of his garden project also applied to his law firm. The 10 LLC formation documents that you have 90% completed are currently worthless to you and to your client. Only 100% matters to the client. Sometimes it takes a flurry of focused efforts to accomplish something meaningful. It's like opening a window that's stuck. The force you need to get it moving at all can be dramatically higher than the force you need to keep it moving up. And that's where a burst comes in. In the book so far, we've been searching for promising points of intervention. Where can you find leverage points? Now that you've, hopefully, uncovered some candidates, we will shift our mission to restacking resources. Because it's not enough to find a leverage point. Having found it, you have to push. Where does the energy to push come from? It must come from within. The set of resources you have at your disposal: money, labor hours, physical assets, data, and so on. But those resources, deployed exactly as they are today, are not yielding the results you want. That's why we have to restack them. 2. In this section, we'll explore 6 different methods for restacking resources to push on your leverage point. The goal of all 6 methods in visual terms is to add weight to the business end of the lever shown above. Our first method of restacking resources, the imperative to start with a burst, involves an intense period of work with single-minded focus on a goal. Recall the story of the radiology clinic from the previous chapter. The team made a series of big improvements. The receptionist would serve patients there. Contrast in the waiting room, the workflow would be reconfigured to reduce steps, and so on. That story took place over 5 days. It was a quintessential burst, and it was effective because it short-circuited a bunch of potential lags that could have doomed the effort. In a typical work setting, the improvements would have involved a planning session, followed by a series of meetings, which would spawn an email chain that spiraled toward infinity. But by using a burst, the colleagues could bypass all the bureaucracy and collaborate in real time. A burst involves committing dedicated time to accomplish something meaningful. Greg McLaughlin's gardening project was a burst. It got his exclusive focus until it was finished, even though working to completion required him to make that inefficient trip back to the store for a $2 part. A burst is not about compelling people to work harder. It's not saying, hustle and work an extra 10 hours this week because we're in a burst. It's saying, let's do this critical 40-hour project in one intact, focused week. Because if we let it sprawl across 6 weeks, the 40-hour project will turn into a 115-hour project. It's about focus. And this breed of focus has become an endangered species in our lives. 4. Reasons we'll see next. 2. Bridget Schult was a self-proclaimed, hair-on-fire woman, struggling to balance her full-time job as a reporter with her obligations as a mother. In her book, Overwhelmed, she wrote about visiting a social scientist whose research suggested that women like her should have 30 hours of leisure time in a given week. Schult, understandably, found this claim rather incredible. She said her life felt scattered, fragmented, and exhausting. But she reluctantly agreed to keep a time diary, per the man's recommendation. She faithfully logged her time in black notebooks. And she found that, yes, there were indeed many cumulative hours of leisure. But the time didn't actually feel like leisure. It was more like a bunch of harried shards in between other activities. As she wrote, "In tracking my time, I now know exactly how many minutes it can take to break your heart." 7. That's how long it took for my daughter to tell me, in angry tears as I finally cut her 2 long fingernails in the bathroom one evening, that I was always at the computer and never spent enough time with her. And that, when she grew up, she wanted to be a teacher. Because then at least I'll be able to spend time with my kids. In the conference room, hand still on my little black notebooks, I think of confetti. That's how my life feels. Like time confetti, one big, chaotic burst of exploding slivers, bits, and scraps. And really, what does a pile of confetti ever amount to? Time confetti, a brilliant phrase. And we all know there's a work equivalent of time confetti. Our time is continuously carved up between meetings and emails and messaging and calls and to-do list items. A block of time for most workers doesn't look like this. It looks more like this. Illustrations adapted from Ashley Weiland's Time Smart, HBR Press. Every one of those seams in the bars you see above involves task switching. The awkward transitions between activities, when your brain has to refocus and reorient. Task switching is one of those phenomena that have almost no redeeming features. Research shows that it makes us slower, less effective, more prone to errors, more stressed. Yet even as task switching shreds our momentum, we sometimes take a wrong-headed pride in it. Look at how busy we are. We're such good multitaskers. It can be self-perpetuating, too, because as the psychologist Ashley Weiland points out in her book Time Smart, when we feel time poor, we take on small, easy-to-complete tasks because they help us feel more control over our time. Confetti begets confetti. That's why bursts require a block of focused time. The excellent book Sprint, authored by Jake Knapp, John Ziritzky, and Braden Cowitz, provides a step-by-step recipe for staging a 5-day design sprint. You convene a multidisciplinary team and you protect their focus. You give them the gift of unbroken time. Knapp said a typical day for an employee looks like the picture below. The real work, the new priority you care about, gets squeezed in between a bunch of competing commitments. But during a sprint, the core work dominates. The work is the work. Everything else has to wait. And by the end of the week, the reward is that you have completed something, a mock-up or prototype. Now, in a remote work world, this strategy gets more complicated. You can't get everyone in the same room, or at least not easily. And that remote collaboration can spark a variety of miscommunications and misunderstandings. Catherine Durnall Crampton studied the way remote teams collaborated and she wrote, memorably, one of the biggest challenges team members faced was interpreting the meaning of their partner's silence. In other words, imagine that you sent an email out to several colleagues in different offices, expecting a reply from everyone. Some people replied and some didn't. So you're left wondering, about those who didn't reply, what does their silence mean? Crampton found that, over the course of the project, silence had meant all of the following at one time or another. I agree. I strongly disagree. I am indifferent. I am out of town. I am having technical problems. I don't know how to address this sensitive issue. I am busy with other things. I did not notice your question. I did not realize that you wanted a response. The risks of misunderstanding are obvious. You might interpret someone's silence as, I strongly disagree, and begin scheming against their unjust resistance when they're simply out of town. The recent wave of remote work, then, has introduced a minefield of potential conflict. Or has it? Folks, here's the surprise. Crampton's study was published in 2001. The themes of human behavior remain the same, even as the tools and details change. The point here is that when people can row in the same boat, it solves a lot of collaboration challenges. It lets us communicate effortlessly. We all see each other's efforts. We share an obvious destination and can easily perceive progress. By contrast, when we can't be in the same room/boat together, the consequence is delays and misalignments and conflict. The Zoom era largely precludes the same room style of work. 3. But you can still honor the rowing in sync principle by encouraging bursty communication, meaning that there are certain hours in the day that your team is standing by for real-time collaboration. Even teams separated by many time zones can usually find an hour or two of overlap. 2 researchers who studied remote teams found that teams who communicate in bursts exchanging messages quickly during periods of high activity perform much better than remote teams whose conversations involve long lag time between responses and are spread across multiple topic threads. That reference to lag time is critical. The researchers found that it's not distance that limits remote teams. It's delays. It's asynchronous communication that could have been synchronous. Note that this doesn't mean your team needs to always be on and available. That can have its own negative consequences, since some work requires deep individual focus. Some bursts are long and continuous design sprints require devoted energy for 5 consecutive days, and so did the radiology clinic story. But there are also more punctuated forms of bursts, as with the bursty communication principle. And recall that the hospital receiving area story that began the book involved the team collaborating closely for 1 hour per day over 12 days. 3. To see how these ideas can fit together, consider how Matthew Knees handled the first few months of his tenure as leader of the Technical Data Center, TDC, team at ExxonMobil. When he joined the team in 2012, his first impressions were not promising. It was a big room, and it was just full of shelf after shelf after shelf. And each one of those shelves was stacked with boxes and boxes of data. Everything from CDs to tape drives to USBs. Knees estimated there were probably petabytes. A petabyte is 1,000 terabytes of data in the room. Primarily seismic data from past subsurface explorations around the world. The TDC team was the last stop for that data, responsible for receiving and preparing the files for long-term storage off-site. The data in the room was worth millions and millions of dollars. And when Knees joined the team, it was in a state of utter disarray, he said. There was a multi-year backlog of files, meaning that it was going to take them at least several years to clear the files that were on those shelves. And while the files were in this limbo state waiting for their final home in the permanent archives, they could be hard to locate. Someone would come in and say, "Hey, I'm looking for Angola dataset block 17, do you have that dataset?" said Knees. The team would poke around earnestly for the requested records, but often the searches were fruitless. There were too many shelves and too many boxes. The consequences of this failure could be very expensive. Unable to locate the data, the company might have to go back to the original vendor, the people who collected the original seismic data years earlier, and plead with them to provide a copy. "Can you send us a copy of that Angola data you created for us 8 years ago?" In more than one case, the needless delay for data meant the company risked missing out on a chance to make an educated bid on a particular business opportunity. Knees remembers his boss being openly skeptical about the group. "They just can't do anything." The boss would actually walk around the entire TDC area to get to the bathroom, even though the most direct route was straight through it. He just couldn't face it. Knees, with the optimism that comes from being a first-time manager, thought he could fix things. He set an ambitious goal, to vanquish the backlog in 18 months. When he shared that aspiration with the TDC team, they seemed polite but skeptical. Knees's boss was less restrained. He laughed in Knees's face. "So pause there for a second. You're in charge of a team that's stuck. What's your first move? You look for a leverage point. To Nice, the obvious place to start was with archiving the processing step that happened before the files were shipped offsite. The archiving process would allow them to clear out the boxes and files clogging up the shelves. That, in turn, would give the team a tangible payoff, kind of a seismic version of spring cleaning. With that leverage point in mind, he started with a burst. He announced that every Thursday morning, the whole team would gather around the main table in the TDC area, and they'd all archive together all day. And they said, "Yeah, but Laura works on her stuff and Dorothy works on her stuff. We all have different areas." I said, "Yeah, I know, but we're all going to do it together." Nice said, "Everybody at the same table, at the same time, with a common task." That's the spirit of a burst. The first Thursday, he brought in breakfast and sat down at the communal table with them. They were surprised to see him there. They weren't used to the boss archiving. The truth was that he hadn't learned how to archive yet. So that day he made it his job to pull stickers off old tapes, scrape off old barcodes so they could slap new ones on. Scrape, 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 all day long. He joked that by the end of that Thursday, his fingertips had no skin on them. The result? The team took 2 giant carts down to send off to long-term storage. I will never forget the joy when I walked down to our shipping area with 2 of the guys, said Nice. And they were just beaming. They were like, "We have never archived this much, ever." Every Thursday, they continued the work, and it was addictive, because the progress was so tangible. 2 or 3 cartloads, every week. Within just a matter of a couple of months, you can start to see holes through the shelves, said Nice. Remember the progress principle from the introduction, of all the things that can boost emotions, motivation, and perceptions during a workday. The single most important is making progress in meaningful work. All of a sudden, it was possible to imagine a future with no backlog. A clear shelf future. 4. What Nice was doing without realizing it was honoring a motivational strategy that comes from Miguel Brondel, a professor of marketing at the University of Basel. Early in your pursuit of your goal, look backwards at what you have achieved. Toward the end, look forward, he told a reporter. Brondel's idea makes intuitive sense. If you have a goal to lose 10 pounds, it's motivating to see those first few pounds drop off. I lost 1 pound. 2. Then, as you reach the halfway point, it seems more motivating somehow to flip your lens and start counting down to the goal. Only 4 pounds left to go. 3, 2, 1. So, in the case of Nice's team, the first revelation is that something, anything, is happening. 2 carts get shipped out on the first day of work. That's like seeing those first 2 pounds drop off. It's working. Then, as the team built up momentum, it generated more energy to look ahead to the end. Imagine when we completely erase the whole backlog and the shelves are mostly bare. The ultimate effect of this, look backward, then look forward, strategy is to minimize the middle. Because in change efforts, the middle is the biggest trouble spot. In the beginning, there's an initial burst of energy, hope, novelty, adventure. It's the first few miles of a marathon. Then, later, you get a second burst as the finish line approaches, pride, satisfaction, relief. But in the middle there's nothing. Just a slow dog paddle forward, unbuoyed by the natural excitement of starts and finishes. It's the battle of midway. As the motivation researcher Eilert Fishbach puts it, the only time we don't throw a party is in the middle. How do you counteract this motivational droop? Fishbach recommends that you shorten the middle. For rather than think in terms of annual goals, where the middle might sprawl from February to November, you could think in terms of monthly or weekly goals. As each period resets, you get a burst of energy from the new beginning. The discipline of Agile pervasive in software development honors this principle. A development team might conduct sprints of 2 or 3 weeks. Just enough time to crank out some meaningful improvements, but not so long that the middle starts to droop. It's like a methodology built around perpetual bursting. There's more to come on Agile in Chapter 11. To get back to Nice and the Technical Data Center, the weekly archiving Bursts were transforming the space. The boss came by one day and said, "Where did all the data go?" said Nice. He was floored. Keeping the momentum going, Nice had the team switch to file closing, a key bureaucratic process but one that didn't have the same emotional payoff as seeing carts full of files disappear from the TDC. So he found ways to make the team's progress visible. At one point, he printed out a fundraising style thermometer, coloring in the red line as they made progress toward the top. They kept working as a team, every Thursday. Setting team-level goals, rather than individual ones, united their efforts. In the past, one woman, we'll call her Jane, had been notorious for telling other people, "Don't touch my files." Nice said that she was one of the best archivers in the group, but she had always stuck to her silo. He said the Thursday bursts transformed the way she worked. All of a sudden, Jane was no longer interested in just Jane's files. Jane was interested in everyone's files, said Nice. Nice's goal to finish the archiving in 18 months had seemed absurd. But they finished with months to spare. The biggest transformation, though, was within the team itself. The TDC is no longer this team that nobody believes in, said Nice. They became a team that believed in themselves. They became a team where they were proud of each other. Together, they had sparked a reset that started around a table, one Thursday. With a concerted burst of work. On this theme of working to completion, a reader shared a great story about having a life crap month one July, which involved finishing many of adulthood's nagging tasks, revisiting a will, reviewing insurance policies, updating emergency contacts and account information, and many other boring but essential activities. Each one was pursued methodically until complete. The payoff? Words are insufficient to express my satisfaction level on July 31. 2. By the way, if you have untapped funds, or if you can hire more people, or you can otherwise bring new assets to bear, then, of course, do that. I'm not going to focus on adding more, since most people I encounter don't have that luxury. But if you do, then milk it. There's no shame in taking the easier route. You'll still follow exactly the same strategy laid out in this section. You'll still need to pay attention to waste, motivation, alignment, etc. You'll just have a little extra momentum thanks to those extra resources. 3. Though, honestly, is it so crazy to invest in bringing dispersed team members together for a week or two to inaugurate some new change effort? My guess is that the benefits of the burst would far outweigh the travel costs. For funny, my body turnaround consultant keeps saying something similar to this. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 6, Start with a Burst. 1. The first way to restack resources on leverage points is to start with an intense burst of effort. Think of dislodging a stuck window. 2. Bursts are an antidote to the harms of task switching, continually moving back and forth between activities, which is inefficient and stressful. Bridget Schultz said her life felt like time confetti. Confetti begets confetti. Ashley Wylans said, when we feel time poor, we take on small, easy to complete tasks because they help us feel more control over our time. 3. The strategic use of protected blocks of time can spark quick change. In design sprints, the team members block their schedule for 5 days of collaboration. Even remote teams can embrace this by using bursty communication, reserving hours for real-time communication. Delays from asynchronous communication are the enemy. 4. A burst involves working to completion. Your team accomplishes something tangible, even if it's not efficient. Greg McLaughlin, helping his wife install a new hose system for the family garden, realized he needed to make another trip to Home Depot for a $2 part. It wasn't efficient, but it was effective. It made his customer, aka wife, happy. 5. Bursts elevate the team's goals over the individuals. That can spark more team spirit and better collaboration. In ExxonMobil's technical data center, the team managed to overcome a multi-year backlog of archives by starting a tradition of all-hands archiving together every Thursday. 6. The enemy of change efforts is the middle, when motivation lags. Bursts can help that by shrinking the middle. Eilert Fishbach, the only time we don't throw a party is in the middle. For more on time confetti and how to avoid it, check out Bridget Schultz's book. Overwhelmed, as well as Ashley Weiland's book Time Smart. You can read an excerpt here. Time Confetti and the Broken Promise of Leisure. If you think a design sprint might help your team vault forward quickly, Sprint is a terrific resource. In this book, the authors detail the sprint method they developed at Google and which they've applied in organizations big and small around the world, for remote teams looking to accelerate their collaboration. Here's an article on the ways bursty communication can help your team thrive. If the middle problem of motivation resonated with you, it's worth picking up a copy of Get It Done by Eilert Fishbach. She draws on the burgeoning field of motivation science to develop a framework for navigating personal change. Another strategy for combating the murky middle is to multiply milestones, which means finding intermediate achievements worthy of celebrating. My brother and I devote 7. Recycle waste. You can restack resources on your leverage points by ending work that doesn't serve the mission. Recycle waste. 1. The leaders in the city of Asheboro in North Carolina wanted to reduce their fuel costs. One area that consumed a lot of fuel was trash collection. They couldn't stop or delay trash collection. That's the kind of move that reliably riles up citizens. But by analyzing the system as a whole, they hoped they'd spot inefficiencies. Map the system. They had a fleet of regular trash trucks that drove block by block to pick up trash. In addition, they had 2 bulk trash trucks capable of picking up larger items such as mattresses or fridges, plus an additional 2 brush/yard waste trucks that would retrieve big tree limbs, bagged piles of leaves, and so on. Just like the normal trash trucks, these 4 special trucks would drive up and down every street in the city. What the Asheboro leaders realized, in their investigation, was that the special trucks didn't have many customers. How often do you throw out an old fridge? So the bulk trucks were driving routes where the vast majority of miles, and thus gallons of fuel, were wasted. Inspired, the city's IT team commissioned a mobile device that could be used by the regular sanitation workers. When they encountered a house that needed a special pickup, a mattress or a tree limb, the crew would just press a button on the device, which would log the GIS coordinates for that house. They were laying a digital breadcrumb trail for the bulk trash team. Suddenly, those 4 special trucks didn't have to drive down every single block. They could just drive point to point, since all the addresses had been logged by their colleagues. As a result, the city of Asheboro saved thousands of dollars in gas and reduced wear and tear on their trucks. They cut waste. Waste is a word with a lot of associations: garbage, landfills, a waste of time. But in this book, I want to use a version of the term prevalent in the world of lean thinking, and mentioned briefly in the introduction, which says, waste is anything that doesn't add value to your work in the customer's eyes. Let's say Asheboro saved 1,000 gallons of gas with its innovative point-to-point system. That counts as trimming waste because the citizens served didn't care what routes these trucks drove en route to picking up their bulk trash. By contrast, if Asheboro had saved 1,000 gallons of gas by limiting or delaying the bulk pickups, that would not be trimming waste, because people find it valuable to have their dirty old futons picked up as quickly as possible. Many organizations use the acronym downtime, inspired by the Toyota production system, which for operations researchers is sort of like the holy of holies to capture 8 possible categories of waste: defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, excess processing. The Asheboro trash truck story, for example, showcases how you can reduce waste in the category of transportation. To illustrate all 8 elements, let's analyze waste in a hypothetical bakery. Defects: burned cookies, sad shriveled croissants. Overproduction: the donuts thrown out at the end of the day. Waiting: the worker twiddling thumbs, waiting for dough to rise. Non-utilized talent: a cake decorator washing dishes. Transportation: the flour bag being stored too far from the mixer, requiring it to be moved back and forth constantly. Inventory: overbought milk that went bad. Motion: the people version of transportation, the counter staffs thousands of unnecessary steps going back and forth from the register to the distant coffee pot. Excess processing: birthday cakes being iced using an obscure French technique that pleases the pastry chef but goes unnoticed by the customer, who just wants their kid's name spelled right. This downtime model is grounded in the factory world, so it may not translate completely to your world. Still, I find it pretty easy to find examples of writing waste that fit most of the categories above. The particulars of the model are not as important as its central message. Wasteful activities can come in many colors. Restacking resources on your leverage points can be painful, because most of the resource shifting we do will involve making trade-offs. Remember, change is not an, it's instead of. Even if we know we're making a wise trade-off, it can still come with a sting. Extra time spent on your marriages. Time not spent jockeying for a promotion. Extra money spent on car repair is not available for family vacations. But there's no sting when it comes to waste. The old cliche goes, there's no free lunch, but that's not quite true. Waste is a free lunch. 2. If we can spot waste, we can immediately recycle those resources, money, energy, labor, materials to push harder on our leverage points. And there's no downside. Because the customer, by definition, did not value the things that you cut back. That's why waste is worth obsessing about. 2. At Sweet Green, the salad restaurant, staff had always mixed customers' orders in big metal bowls. The bowls cost a lot and they had to be washed between uses, which consumed a lot of water and energy and dishwashing labor. So somebody wondered, hey, what if we didn't need these bowls? Your first thought might be, let the customer mix their own salad. But wait, mixing the salad does add value, at least for many customers, so it's not a wasteful activity. Customers don't really care where their salad is mixed, though. What if you could just mix their salad in the takeout bowls? No transfers required, no washing. Sweet Green tested that idea, but the staffers found that the typical takeout bowls were too shallow and small to allow for easy mixing. Downtime. Defects in spilled salad, excess processing in slower times. So instead, the chain commissioned a larger hexagonal to-go bowl that was conducive to mixing. The metal bowls were shelved. Poof, waste eliminated. But notice that eliminating waste required seeing the whole system. Map the system. To the people mixing the salads, the metal bowls seemed necessary. To the dishwashers, they seemed inevitable. Habits conceal waste. I started thinking about my parenting through the lens of waste. One day I was replaying in my head the morning routine of getting my 2 young daughters ready for school. There was plenty of waste. Nagging is waste. Fussing is waste. Crying is waste. And that was just me. My daughters were doing plenty of wasteful things, too. I imagined what a map of our movements would look like, in the spirit of those spaghetti charts from Chapter 5, countless trips up and down the stairs to retrieve shoes or socks. Downtime, motion. Sometimes, my daughters would filibuster my wife and me long enough that, feeling rushed, we'd end up tying their shoes for them, even though they're fully capable. Downtime. No utilized talent. So my wife schemed up one systemic improvement. She piled all the girls' shoes and socks, including a frankly disturbing quantity of Crocs, into a big drawer by the back door. Now there are no more socks or shoes upstairs. As a bonus, we don't get dirt tracked through the house because now they take off their shoes when they come inside and dump them in the drawer. That saves needless cleaning. Downtime, excess processing. As a result of our anti-waste efforts, our morning habits have improved meaningfully, which has freed up extra time to argue about whether it's safe to eat the brown spot on the waffle. Downtime, defects. 3. Waste is a familiar concept in the business canon. Anyone who's ever sat through a Lean, Six Sigma, or Kaizen training will know the idea well. If you want the deep dive on the subject, good news, there is an entire internet full of waste-related content waiting for you, along with countless consultants standing by, ready to help. Our purpose here, though, is not necessarily to make your enterprise more efficient in the long term, which is often the goal of waste reduction. Our purpose is to help you reset, get you unstuck and moving. You're hoping to put Some points on the board in weeks or months, not quarters or years. In keeping with that, you've got to stay focused on waste that can be quickly harvested and repurposed. You're looking for hours, dollars, and resources that can be redeployed immediately from one purpose to another. Remember the hospital receiving area from the introduction, and the frequent calls to the red phone? "Where's my package?" Every time Suet and his team stopped one of those calls from happening, they recycled waste. They took 5 minutes from a non-value-added activity and made it available for value-added activity, which, notice, made it more likely that they'd prevent even more of those package-seeking calls in the future. They banked some quick wins. The pastor Graham Standish was looking for quick wins in his worship service. In an era of declining church attendance, it's a struggle to keep a congregation engaged and loyal. Standish had some compelling ideas about how to freshen up the service, but often the changes would meet resistance from longtime members. Swapping out classic hymns for contemporary ones, for example, drew complaints from some old-timers. But he identified something that he was sure no one would miss: the dead time during the worship service. First, he cut out watching. He explained, "It's typical in a church that when someone finishes a prayer or something, we watch them walk back to their seat. And once they sit down, the next person stands and walks to the front. But now we have trained people to be right at the front and ready to go. So no watching." That shaved a few idle minutes from the service. He also changed the way announcements were handled. In the past, a bunch of announcements were read aloud, then Standish would ask whether anyone had additional announcements. Long delay. Sometimes, someone in the back would raise their hand and say something that no one could hear. Standish would repeat it. In the new model, Standish would only make the most critical announcements, and he trained the congregation to rely on the bulletin for smaller issues. Standish even flagged the kind of ceremonial preambles that people would often use at the podium. "As we begin our service this morning, let us come to God with a sense of prayerful readiness," he joked. The effect of these tweaks: he managed to trim 5 to 10 minutes from the service time without cutting any of the actual worship. People commented to me how they didn't know what was different, but it just felt like the service was more seamless, he said. One person said to me, "I just love how everything just seems to fit together and how well everyone works together." The service felt zippier, and the church members were able to leave earlier, which gave them a precious head start in beating other congregations to local restaurants for Sunday lunch. 4. In non-factory environments, probably the most critical component of the downtime framework is the non-utilized talent. 3. This category includes idle time, distracted time. But its most profound meaning is this: it's wasteful when people are playing below their level. As an example, recall the Gartner story from Chapter 3 on studying bright spots. Ken Davis discovered that the critical leverage point in keeping clients happy and likely to renew was getting them on the phone with client partners. The best use of a client partner's time, then, was a call with a client. Given that realization, it became clear that scheduling calls was a wasteful activity for the client partners. That's non-utilized talent. Because a lot of people were capable of scheduling calls, or the scheduling could be automated. What the client partners were uniquely good at was helping clients live with their business challenges. A minute stolen from scheduling calls and added to helping clients was a win. That's the spirit of recycling waste. When you clear lower value activities from people's schedules to free them up for higher value ones, let's call that shifting right. That's a term I learned from Gary Kaplan, the president of AXA XL's construction insurance business. To understand how Kaplan has implemented Shift Right, it helps to know a bit about his business. For construction companies, who are Kaplan's customers, there is a long list of risks for which they might want to buy insurance, such as workers getting hurt, accidental polluting of the area, subcontractors defaulting and leaving the project in the lurch, and more. Kaplan's group wants to sell insurance for these risks, but that requires a lot of judgment, since there aren't millions of data points to rely on, as there might B for life insurance. Underwriters are the people who wield that judgment. They determine how much to charge potential clients for their unique risks. 2. Provide liability insurance for workers' accidents. For instance, the underwriters would ask a lot of questions about workplace safety practices. If they learned that the construction foreman was obsessive about safety, then they'd charge less for insurance coverage. So Kaplan started working with underwriters to understand their work. He teased apart the underwriters' objective work fact-based, black and white, from their subjective work, which required judgment. The objective work could be shifted right, transferred to support staffers or outsourced, but the subjective work couldn't. You want the underwriter to use their brain and their understanding of the customer to help you decide what range of that pricing they should select, the high end or the low end, said Kaplan. That's the subjective work that only the underwriters can do. As a result of this ongoing shift-right work, the average underwriter in Kaplan's group went from managing $4 million in policy premiums to managing $14 million. That's a tripling in productivity that emerged from elevating people to the top of their range. How could you help your team shift right? With the rise of ChatGPT and Claude and other AI models, organizations have begun searching for ways to augment the productivity of their workers. For as one example among many, AI tools can help recruiters do the initial scanning on a flood of incoming resumes for an open position. Or AI chatbots can field the simplest inquiries for a customer support center. A word of caution, though, while this shift-right mentality can be both productive and elevating, helping everyone play at the top of their game, it can certainly be taken too far. Some version of this philosophy has led to the factory mindset of modern healthcare, in which doctors seem to have less and less time with every patient they see. Only doctors can diagnose patients, the thinking goes, so let's shift right everything else, greeting the patient and weighing them and taking their case history and checking their blood pressure and so on. This is compelling logic up to a point. It really does seem wasteful for the doctor to weigh a patient. But human beings are not factories with legs. I love writing, but I would not like to have my schedule purged of research and thinking and teaching so that I could become a pure, optimized prose monkey, maximizing the output of words per hour. If this seems like a morally fraught issue, it need not be. It's really not hard to separate enlightened shifting right from contemptible shifting right. Just ask the people affected. At Gartner, client partners were happy not to have to schedule calls. People will tell you what's good for them, if you care enough to ask. 5. In Ed Catmull's fascinating book, Creativity, Ed Catmull is the co-founder of Pixar. He tells the story of arriving at Disney Animation and discovering that the creative team was basically at war with the oversight group, which was chartered with ensuring that the creatives stayed on time and on budget. The creative team bristled under this supervision. They felt they no longer had the flexibility they needed to respond quickly to problems because the oversight group nitpicked every decision, even the tiniest decision, to death, said Catmull. They felt powerless. So Catmull and the producer John Walker made a surprising decision. They eliminated the oversight group. But was that wise? Wouldn't it introduce a lot of risk into the production? Here is how Catmull analyzed the decision. We believed that the production people were conscientious managers who were trying to bring a complex project in on time and on budget. In our view, the oversight group added nothing to the process but tension. The micromanagement they imposed was of no value, since the production people already had a set of limits that determined their every move, the overall budget and the deadline. Within that, they needed all the flexibility they could get. The level of oversight, in his telling, was wasteful. To return to the downtime framework, micromanagement is a toxic combination of excess processing, too much management per unit of work, and no utilized talent, restricting the creative's ability to use their full range of talents. Another example of excessive oversight came from an account executive at a SaaS software company, who told me about the insane amount of time his team spends forecasting sales. We're supposed to sit there for probably 30 minutes every day, just entering data. Then we have a weekly hour-long call to review that. Data. Then our leaders spend at least 90 minutes a week on another call, reviewing that data with our VPS. Our VPS then go review that data with our EVPs and CRO, every single week. All these calls are staggered throughout the week, so leaders will ping their subordinates for clarifying details every day, who will then ping their subordinates to further clarify, then that update gets rolled back up to the VP, etc. etc. One VP told me he's on 18 hours of forecasting calls every week. Every single week. The point of this is not that oversight is bad. I wrote a book called Upstream that heroicizes people who try to stop problems before they happen, so believe me, I get the value of oversight in compliance. Rather, as the old saying goes, the dose makes the poison. 18 hours of forecasting calls every week is not a wise dose of oversight. It's a continual toilet flushing of human potential. So how can we learn to distinguish wise oversight from wasteful oversight? A useful clarification comes from Jeff Bezos. In a shareholder letter, he compared Type 1 and Type 2 decisions. Type 1 decisions, in his terminology, are consequential and irreversible or nearly irreversible one-way doors, and these decisions must be made methodically, carefully, slowly, with great deliberation and consultation. If you walk through and don't like what you see on the other side, you can't get back to where you were before. Type 2 decisions, though, are reversible. Two-way streets. If you make a decision and you don't like the results, you just undo it. Type 2 decisions can and should be made quickly by high-judgment individuals or small groups, wrote Bezos. Bezos warned that in many organizations, the two types of decisions get confused or conflated. As organizations get larger, there seems to be a tendency to use the heavyweight Type 1 decision-making process on most decisions, including many Type 2 decisions, he wrote. The end result of this is slowness, unthoughtful risk aversion, failure to experiment sufficiently, and consequently, diminished invention. Some decisions, Bezos is saying, really do deserve this slow, cautious approach. Mergers, acquisitions, major pricing shifts, potential layoffs, and more. Take your time, get it right. But most decisions, such as how to animate a scene in a cartoon, or how to forecast this week's sales activity, are easily reversible and shouldn't be bogged down by excessive process. Using a Type 1 process on Type 2 decisions is simply wasteful. In this chapter, we've seen myriad ways that waste can be recaptured. Recaptured fuel from smarter trash truck routes. Recaptured minutes from sluggish church services. Recaptured time for underwriters. And recaptured energy and motivation for henpecked animators. The quest to recapture waste is a theme that will continue to thread through the material that follows. Next up, what happens when you've repurposed all the waste and you still need more fuel? Inevitably, in the absence of new resources, you'll have to cut back on something. How do you make those trade-offs in the least painful way possible? Maybe a more accurate writer's acronym would be DUMPS, involving distraction, undermotivation, missed deadlines, procrastination, and self-hatred. To you but true. 3. I had to chuckle about the clunky phrase, no utilized talent. Underutilized talent would probably be a little less neuron grating, but unfortunately then you'd be stuck with downtime as your mnemonic. I can appreciate a good acronym shoehorning when I see it. As a serial offender myself. For I was hopeful that I could get ChatGPT to shoulder the burden of writing this book, allowing me to shift right to napping and Wordle. Never could quite figure out how to use its talents, though. Maybe next book. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 7, Recycle Waste. 1. The second way to restack resources is to capture waste, which is any activity that doesn't add value in the customer's eyes. In Ashboro, waste was cut by using technology that allowed bulk trash trucks to follow point-to-point routes for customer pickups. 2. Waste comes in many varieties, and it's worth obsessing about, because waste offers a free lunch. You can restack resources with no painful trade-off. The downtime framework expands our thinking about the many kinds of waste. Defects, overproduction, waiting, non-utilized talent, transportation, inventory, motion, and excess processing. B as an example, Sweet Green cut waste by mixing salads directly in the customers' bowls. 3 in non-factory environments, a critical area of waste is people playing below their level. You can correct that by shifting right. At AXA XL, Gary Kaplan consciously cleared his people's plates of lower value activities, so they could focus on what they did best. For one note of caution, shifting right can be taken too far. It can lead to soul deadening. Over-specialization, as with the factory mindset of modern healthcare. But you can get it right on your team. People will tell you what's good for them, if you ask them. 5. Micromanagement is another near-universal kind of waste. Ed Catmull eliminated the oversight group that was nitpicking the creatives. B. A sales VP at one company logged 18 hours of forecasting calls every week. 6. How do you distinguish proper oversight from wasteful oversight? Jeff Bezos distinguished Type 1 decisions, big and nearly irreversible, from Type 2 decisions, readily reversible. It's best not to 8. Do less and more. You can restack resources on your leverage points by shifting effort from lower value work to higher value. Do less and more. 1. Rosa's daughter Mia had recently been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Mia was doing better in school. The return to in-person school, post-pandemic, had helped her, and Rosa wanted to keep the momentum going at home. But Rosa was starting to feel overwhelmed, especially in the mornings. She and her husband, Sal, had to get ready for work and get Mia, plus her 2 sisters, off for school and daycare. Rosa and Sal found themselves constantly yelling and barking orders at their children to finish breakfast and get ready to leave. It was the worst possible way to start the day. Chaotic, intense, especially for Mia, who would react to the stress by acting out even more. Rosa had read up on how parents could help children with ADHD, but she found herself reacting in the moment, losing patience. It challenged Rosa's confidence as a parent. She didn't want to be part of the problem. Sal and Rosa had briefly considered medication for Mia, but they were extremely wary of it. Mia was only 7 years old. Rosa made an appointment with John J. Murphy, a solutions-focused therapist. Early in their first session, Murphy asked her about the bright spots in their relationship, the times when Mia behaved well. Here's how the conversation went from there, as recounted in Murphy's book Solution Focused Therapy. Rosa, there are times when Mia listens and minds better, and it's easier interacting with her. She's very task-oriented when you give her jobs. She loves to help. She craves attention, so when you do give her positive attention, she responds well. If I've got a craft activity planned, or I'm baking something she can help with, or playing a game with her, she can be a model child. When we do things like that, it's definitely better. But it's just not always possible to give her the level of attention she craves. That's when she'll find other ways to get attention, and that's when the trouble starts. Therapist, it's interesting how she responds so well to the positive attention you give her. Like a model child, as you said. That's a high compliment coming from a parent. Rosa smiles. Yeah, she's good during those times. She's definitely capable of it. Therapist, it sounds like you're both capable of making that happen. Rosa, it's just getting her to be more like that when she's not getting the attention. Therapist, yes. So, these events and times are happening, just maybe not as often, or, in as many situations, as you would like? Rosa, yes. Therapist, I'm curious what else you do, or other people do, or anything else that helps make these events and times happen more. Rosa, let's see. Getting to bed at a decent time definitely helps me wake up quicker and feel better, you know, more energy, less irritable. I'm more patient with Mia and everybody else. The same for Sal. Sometimes we both stay up too late, and we end up regretting it in the morning. As the conversation continued, Rosa and Murphy identified a number of possible leverage points to make things better, including setting out her children's clothes the night before school, going to bed a little earlier, setting her alarm to wake up 20 or 30 minutes before waking the kids, and occasionally initiating a game or craft with Mia in the evening. When Rosa came back for her next session, she reported a dramatic improvement. She had tried a bunch of different things and the one that worked best, she reported, was waking up before the kids. Just being able to sit and breathe a little in the morning, have a cup of coffee in peace before the chaos starts. It puts me in a more positive mindset. I can be more chill with Mia, my kids, my husband. She actually discontinued therapy soon thereafter. Her relationship with Mia wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better. Rosa improved a critical relationship after one therapy session. That's getting unstuck quickly, although perhaps not a great business model for therapists. How did it happen? First, Rosa and Murphy identified some possible leverage points by studying bright spots. Notice how the therapist draws her attention to the times Rosa is already succeeding. Sounds like you're both capable of making that happen. Then, Rosa immediately restacked her resources to support them. In this case, that meant changing the way she spent her time, choosing to wake up 20-30 minutes before her kids, which in turn meant going to bed earlier. Notice this was not a costless decision. To accommodate that extra time in the morning to summon her zen place before the chaos began, she had to skimp on time with Sal the night before. There was no waste to recycle here. The time swap was a trade-off, and it stung. This chapter is devoted to that core trade-off, less of this, more of that. And what we're chasing, in particular, is a way to minimize the sting of those trade-offs. In Rosa's situation, she faced what was effectively a zero-sum trade, time in the evening for time in the morning. But in organizations it's not always zero-sum like that. If you know where to look, you can find low-sting, high-bang trade-offs. 2. David Filippi's firm, Strategex, grounds its work in the Pareto principle, the idea that 80% of the outputs/consequences come from 20% of the inputs/causes. Filippi's job is to help clients distinguish the 20% from the 80%, and then to change their operations based on those insights. In one case, Filippi and his team were working with a manufacturer of optical instruments. The company had about 3,500 customers, mostly military, aerospace, and healthcare organizations. Some number crunching revealed that 10% of those customers yielded 80% of the revenue. When it came to profit, though, the numbers were even more stark. The company's top set of customers were generating more than all of the company's profit. In other words, the great majority of the company's customers were unprofitable. The fallacy that most people believe is that 20% of customers or products are 80% of the profits, said Filippi. And that's not true. What we find is that those 20% of customers that are 80% of the revenue are generally 150% of the profit. So what we tell our clients from the get-go is, your problem isn't that you're not making enough. It's that you're not keeping it. Filippi has found that his clients make twin mistakes. They undercoddle their best customers and overcoddle their worst. Often those mistakes derive from a noble desire. These companies aspire to treat customers the same. And treating people equally is a great goal for, say, craps dealers or democracy. But to treat a $1 million customer the same as a $100 customer? It's like treating your hamster the same as your daughter because they're both mammals. Filippi finds that, paradoxically, the biggest customers are often treated worse than the smallest. One of the questions we ask clients is, what's your on-time delivery rate for those critical few customers, the 20% that are 80% of the revenue, he said. And it was shocking to me, but what we generally find is that the on-time delivery rates are far better with the smaller customers than they are with their largest customers. The reason? Their orders are simpler. It's easier to get one piece shipped out than a complicated assembly involving 100 pieces. But if the shipping team is measured on the percentage of on-time deliveries, then that provides a perverse incentive to neglect the hard cases. They can ace the 97 easy deliveries, deprioritize the 3 hard ones, and look like geniuses. 97% on-time rate. Once you catch on to this pattern, you can easily fix it. You make sure that all shipments are not treated equally. For your top customers, the on-time rate should be perfect, 100%. Always and forever. That's how you keep them loyal and encourage them to do more business with you. Meanwhile, what should you do about the mass of overcoddled customers? Felipe says that clients are often fearful about changing those relationships. Aren't we going to ruin our business if we tell some customers no? 2. He reassures them that it's not about telling some customers to buzz off. The point is to ensure that customers are paying for the resources they're consuming. There are many ways to approach this: raise prices, create a minimum order size, set lower expectations for things like delivery time, offer self-service tools. It's your job to define the offer for your customers. It's their job to accept or decline. If there are customers who huff and puff about your new offer and take their business elsewhere, take heart, you've won a double victory. You've taken some unprofitable customers off your ledger and added them to your competitors. This is restacking resources. To get unstuck and start moving again, you need to free up resources, and Strategex is showing you how. Steal from the overcoddled and give to the undercoddled. Here's a haunting thought: what if the story is the same in our personal lives? What if we are undercoddling the most important people and overcoddling the least? Felipe brought up this issue with me. If you look at why marriages struggle or why people struggle, they're generally spread too thin. Trying to do too much and not spending the amount of time they need to on those critical core issues. Sometimes it's money, but a lot of times it's, boy, we're doing too many things. Whenever we try to do too much, it steals time away from the things that matter most. Felipe and his team use a force ranking process with business clients that we might adapt for our personal lives as well. They'll rank order the clients' customers from best to worst and then group them into quartiles. As we've seen, the bottom quartile of customers is almost always unprofitable. You would literally have a better business, in almost all respects, other than perhaps top line revenue, by cutting them loose. My guess is that if you did a similar force ranking analysis of the relationships in your life, you'd find similar dynamics in the bottom quartile. You'd find relationships that cause a lot of stress, or that consume a lot of time, without a commensurate return of meaning or happiness. Is this suggestion too mercenary? To be clear, you need not rank people according to what you get from them, like a business might. I'm sorry, son, but you're insufficiently profitable to deserve your current allocation of affection. Nor do you need to rank people according to who makes you happiest. If you regularly visit an older relative at a nursing home, for instance, you probably don't get many giggles from the experience, but it's not about that. The point is, you're the one who gets to set the scoreboard. For Felipe, it's his wife and kids who are at the top of the charts. He tries to make decisions accordingly. In the spring of 2024, he led a 2-day training session near his home in the Chicago area. After the first day ended, the client invited him to dinner. Rather than make up an excuse, he tried leveling with them. I've got 3 kids, he explained. My oldest son, he's 12, he wants to play ping pong. My middle daughter wants to play Super Mario Brothers. My youngest, he's a soccer player, he wants me to play goalie. So thank you very much for the invitation, but I want to go home and spend time with them. Because there's gonna come a day that they're not gonna want to do these things anymore. That night, after sessions of soccer and Super Mario Brothers, the 2 younger kids got to bed. Now it was time for ping pong. During the game, his son told him, "Dad, I tried out for the school play, and there's gonna be lots of auditions. So I don't think we can play ping pong anymore." And it struck Felipe. I knew the day was coming, but I didn't know it was going to be tonight. I got the last match in with my son, he said. He was thankful not to have traded that for a client dinner. Every day we have a choice, said Felipe. 3. As the ping pong story makes clear, the Pareto-style analysis used by Strategex is not exclusive to revenue and profit. Your goals might have nothing to do with juicing business results. Maybe you're trying to keep employees more engaged, or serve the homeless better, or overhaul federal wetlands policy. Whatever direction you're pushing, you need to find a leverage point and Restack resources on it. And Strategex is showing us that, with the right analysis, we can reliably find places where we're spending too many resources, and other places where we're spending too few. That analysis can apply not just to profits but to donors or programs or employee benefits or campaign activities. Strategex's approach can be data-intensive, trawling through thousands of customer records. But there are less rigorous ways to arrive at similar conclusions. My guess is that any nonprofit's staff could tell you confidently which donors are overcoddled. Any school's staff could tell you which parents are overcoddled. No big data analysis needed. Here's a simple tool for separating areas that need more from areas that need less. I learned it from a friend who used this exercise at an offsite and reported that it sparked really useful discussion. Basically, you draw quadrants on a whiteboard with the following labels. You can fill in the quadrants with any kind of thing. Stop, the policy that it's okay to bring pets to work. It's getting smelly and weird. Start, using an outside law firm to handle contracts. It's a constraint internally. More, inside sales efforts in the Southeast. It's working. Less, ginning up employee social events. Not many people seem to care. My friend said the hardest quadrants to address were less and, especially, stop. Which is predictable. Usually, when we think about making changes, we're thinking about adding something. New ideas, new initiatives, new investments. But we've got to remember the mantra, change is not an, it's. Instead of less of this, more of that. That instead of mindset was the heart of the turnaround strategy used by Art Mollenhauer after he accepted the role of CEO of the Big Brothers Big Sisters of Metropolitan Chicago, BBBSMC, in 2006. When he took over, the organization was in bleak shape. Basically insolvent. It had been surviving week to week on board members' credit cards and life support payments from the national organization. Mismanaged for years, the Chicago chapter was failing at its core mission, which was to invest in at-risk youth by matching them with mentors. Mollenhauer knew what he was getting into. He had basically quadrupled the length of the job interview process at his own request. He flew to the national office on his own dime. He sat in on a board meeting. He signed up to be a volunteer and made a $25 donation to experience the organization from the outside. Go and see the work. He even met with the organization's anxious bankers, who let him know that the organization had used 95% of its credit limit. Early in his tenure, he met with major donors to convince them that better times were coming. He challenged board members to pony up to support the turnaround, offering to match their contributions 1-to-1 with his own money. Meanwhile, he forced a reassessment of the organization's programs, which were both plentiful and ineffective. Mollenhauer asked, which of our programs are delivering on our mission? And which are providing a financial contribution? Programs that did neither were discontinued, no matter how well intentioned. About a fifth of BBBSMC's programs were mothballed within months of Mollenhauer taking the job. On another front, he assessed the organization's staff and board members. It was pretty apparent that there were some great assets in the organization, he said. There were also some people, on the other hand, that had to go. And had to go fairly quickly. Within a month, a third of the board and a quarter of the staff were gone. Some left voluntarily, and others were fired. Mollenhauer looked at every resulting vacancy as an opportunity, a chance for renewal, a chance to replace an underperformer with a star. Much of Mollenhauer's early work, then, was devoted to stanching the organizational bleeding, reducing expenses, cutting the programmatic deadwood, firing underperformers, reassuring nervous bankers. But even as he worked on the crisis side of the ledger, he was investing in new opportunities as well. Not just stop plus less but also start plus more. He arranged an expensive board retreat at Northwestern University, believing that the board needed to start acting like the forward-looking entity it aspired to become. He created a new role, a corporate partnership manager, and hired someone, to the tune of $60,000. Chicago has an amazing corporate presence, said Mollenhauer. I thought we had a great opportunity to really grow. One of his most striking moves concerned the organization's offices. 4. Context: corporate real estate is often graded as Class A, B, or C Class C. Properties, in the description of one real estate website, are barely functional and cheap to rent in the waning days of their useful life. The organization's offices at that time were, Mollenhauer joked, a Class C-. The elevators were constantly breaking down, he said. The sewage was constantly backing up. And what was fascinating is a lot of the corporate board members were kind of saying, well, this is how it is in a non-profit. Gritty. You know, we don't spend a lot on offices and overhead. And I saw all these people, hard-working staff, in a very deficient place. Mollenhauer thought, we've got to get a new office. Because the decrepitude of the place somehow symbolized the organization's state. This is what we deserve. This is who we are. It was almost like a heavy-handed metaphor, we stink. But the timing for an upgrade was rough. Mollenhauer realized it took a certain amount of chutzpah to pitch the board a long-term contract for new office space, even as he was laying off staff and pledging financial responsibility to bankers. He persisted, though. We can't get so consumed with short-term issues that we forget to think about the future, he argued. It helped his case when, on the day he pitched the new office idea, 4 board members got stuck in the elevator, and the air conditioner broke down, and sewage was clearly visible in the washrooms. Some board members wondered whether Mollenhauer had set it all up. Ultimately, the board greenlit the request, and the search began for an office that better fit their aspirations, and that was free of open sewage. With Mollenhauer pushing change on every front, the turnaround didn't take long. Within 40 days, they'd paid off their line of credit. I think the banker almost cried, we did it so quickly, quipped Mollenhauer. Within about a year, to the delight of the employees, they moved into their new office. People felt like they were valued and treasured, he said. And the newly hired corporate partnership manager landed a deal with Bank of America, which included a $30,000 grant. We celebrated the heck out of that with our board and our staff, said Mollenhauer. We said, I know we've had trouble, but Bank of America is a very serious organization. It was a strong vote of confidence in the new direction. 4. What I want to underscore about Mollenhauer's work is the idea that in the early stages of change, you've got to be ambidextrous, both cutting and investing. Both defense and offense. Less and more. This is a theme echoed by other turnaround experts. You cannot save your way to health, said Michael M. Kaiser in The Art of the Turnaround, his excellent book discussing how he turned around prestigious arts organizations, including the Royal Opera House and the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. The first inclination of most boards and staffs is that they will save their organizations by saving money. But the true turnaround artist possesses the discipline to carve out time each week to focus on artistic programming, board development, donor and press cultivation, and other activities that will make future years easier. Too many executives spend all of their time on short-term issues. If making this week's payroll is one's sole focus, next week is certain to be more difficult. The same finding was reinforced by a study in the Harvard Business Review of how companies fared after recessions. The authors Runji Gulti, Nitin Noraya, and Firmans Woljogen analyzed how 4,700 public companies reacted to 3 global recessions. What strategy best equipped the companies to thrive after a recession? The worst strategy was a cut-only approach. In these companies, pessimism permeates the organization, the authors wrote. Centralization, strict controls, and the constant threat of more cuts build a feeling of disempowerment. The focus becomes survival, both personal and organizational. Almost as bad was a blithe, ignore the bad news and keep investing, strategy. With that kind of positive groupthink, naysayers are marginalized and realities are overlooked, they found. The best strategy? Blending cuts and investments. Less and more. Just like Mollenhauer's game plan. That balancing act is essential. If the central question of change is how can You do something different and better. There are really only two answers: 1. By adding more resources, or 2. By using your resources differently. And, for most people, option 1 is off the table. Worse still, in turnaround situations, you might need to make things different and better while consuming fewer resources, which puts even more emphasis on option 2. Yet in change situations you will almost always need to invest more somewhere, because you need resources to restack on your leverage points. At Big Brothers Big Sisters, Art Mollenhauer invested in a brand new position, the Corporate Partnership Manager. Part of the money to fund that role came from new resources, remember his matching grant, and part of it came from cutting back on subpar programs and staffers. Cut here, invest there. So far in this section, we've explored 3 ways to muster resources, starting with a burst, recycling waste, and doing less and more. Next we'll explore perhaps the most perennially squandered resource, motivation. If you want to get out of a rut and leap forward, you can't do it without motivation, because motivation is the fuel for forward movement. And the good news is that motivation exists already. The mission is to tap it. What does it mean for some customers to generate more than all of a company's profit? Consider a tax prep firm with 3 customers who pay $100 each. Customers A and B have straightforward situations. It costs about $60 apiece to serve them, so they each generate $40 in profit. Meanwhile, customer C's situation is complex and he is also hard to communicate with, meaning a lot of time is burned. It costs $120 to serve him, for a loss of $20. So the firm as a whole has revenue of $300, 100 plus 100 plus 100, and profit of $60, 40 plus 40 to 20. So note that customers A and B, together, make up more than all of the company's profit, because if the business had not served customer C, then the total profit would have been $80 instead of $60. 2. In writing this chapter, it occurred to me to my chagrin that I was an overcoddled customer at my local coffee shop. For years, the shop had sold a bottomless cup of coffee with free self-service refills. This was perfect for me and also for a tribe of older people who met every morning and drank about 6 cups apiece, then spent the rest of the morning in the bathroom. But as the coffee shop got more crowded, no doubt we looked less valuable as customers. The bottomless cup people like me were hogging tables that could have been used by the sit down and have a quick breakfast people. So the owners changed the policy. No more self-service, no more refills. You want another cup of coffee? Pay for it. I was totally incensed about this shift at the time. The injustice. But now I see clearly that it was the right move for the owners. And you know what? I still go there every day. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 8, Do Less and More. 1. The third way to restack resources on leverage points is to shift them away from low-value activities. You need to simultaneously do more investing in your leverage points, while investing less in the lower priority activities. 2. Reallocating your resources in a new direction can be painful because of the trade-offs involved. But if you look carefully, you can minimize the sting of those trade-offs. Rosa, the mother, chose to go to bed a bit earlier to help her stay calm in the mornings. But it was not a costless trade-off, as with waste it meant less time in the evening with her husband. 3. The consultancy Strategex has found that businesses consistently overcoddle their worst customers and undercoddle their best. This can be self-destructive given that the best 20% of customers might generate 150% of the profits. As one example of this phenomenon, Strategex often finds that on-time deliveries are actually less common for the best customers than for the worst. B. We should consider the parallel in our personal lives. Which relationships are we overcoddling and undercoddling? For one simple exercise in the spirit of generating smart trade-offs is to ask your team to fill in 4 quadrants: stop, start, less, more. Note that the stop and less areas are the hardest ones. 5. Restacking resources is not just about cutting and it's not just about adding. It's about both, less and more at the same time. Art Mollenhauer's turnaround of the Big Brothers Big Sisters group in Chicago hinged on his willingness to make big cuts to programs, staff, and even board members, while also making smart investments, example by funding decent office space for the beleaguered team. B researchers found that the best strategy for surviving a recession was blending cuts. And in 9. Tap motivation. You can restack resources on your leverage points by prioritizing the work that's required and desired. Tap motivation. 1. Ezra Fox was struggling to get his kids to clean up their toys. The ordinary, authoritative approaches usually met a wall of resistance. One day it dawned on him, he should apply his marketing skills. In marketing, once I'm not interesting, the customer doesn't have to listen anymore, he said. He wondered, could I put a little bit of energy and craft into this in a way that might inspire them? He challenged them to play a game called Hide the Evidence. The rules? In a few minutes, your mom is going to come into the room and try to figure out what you played with. See if you can fool her by cleaning up so well that she can't figure it out. Shortly thereafter, the room was immaculate. And his kids loved it, a dad-sanctioned mission to pull one over on mom. The license to be sneaky was irresistible. Ultimately, the novelty of the new approach faded, as it does with kids and customers. So Ezra kept going back to the drawing board. A subsequent cleanup effort involved a family race, and the chance to beat dad was as attractive as the opportunity to fool mom. Now, you could hear that story and think, oh, those were just tricks. If so, speaking on behalf of millions of parents, please send us more tricks. But attending to motivation is not a trick at all. It's the very heart of change. To motivate people, we've got to pay attention to their desires, their interests, their hopes. And that requires empathy. Dr. Doug Eby, a senior leader at South Central Foundation, an Anchorage-based, Alaska Native-owned healthcare system, provided a great example of what this empathy could look like. He imagined meeting with a 55-year-old male patient with diabetes, someone with a handful of young grandkids. So I know that he is first or second generation from a particular village. He likes to hunt and fish and berry pick and put up food for the winter. And he has young grandkids, and one of his most important life values is connecting those grandkids to their heritage. So when they grow up and become teenagers, he's going to want to help them do all those things. Hunt, fish, berry pick, and so forth. That's his goal. In order to do that, he will need to maintain his eyesight so he can look through the scope on the rifle to kill the caribou or moose or the bear or whatever it is he's hunting. And he needs good eyesight to differentiate between ripe and unripe berries on the ground in front of him. So we talk about diabetes and how it affects eyesight and their ability to hunt and berry pick. And then you talk about fingertips, because you need to be able to feel the fish on the end of the line, on the fishing pole, or to pull the fish out of the net, or to use a knife or an ulu to fillet the fish, or to peel the fat off the hide of what he's hunting. So you need good fingertip sensation. And then you need good toe tip sensation because you need to walk across the tundra to go berry picking and hunting, and you need to feel the bottom of the stream or the river, because they're all glacial fed and you can't see in the water, so you have to feel the bottom with your feet and toes. So the goal is feet and toes, fingertips, and eyesight, preserved for 10 years from now for these 4- and 5-year-old grandchildren to become teenagers to hunt, fish, and berry pick. Now I've got him because these are the most important things in his life. Eby is taking the time to understand the values of his patient and to explain how those values are served by adopting healthy behaviors. Because dispensing advice is worthless unless the patient is willing to act. So Eby starts with a clear understanding of what the patient wants. As the great solution-focused therapist John J. Murphy said, you can't rearrange the furniture unless you are invited into the house. 2. In this section of the book, we're restacking resources to push on the leverage points we've identified. In the last chapter, we focused on reallocating our resources, shifting from lower value efforts to higher value, stopping some things and investing in others. If we're looking for additional fuel for our efforts, a great place to start is with our people. The ultimate wasted resource is motivation. It's not that motivation is misdirected, in the way that, say, sending the city's bulk trash trucks up and down every block was a misdirected and wasteful use of resources. It's more like motivation is untapped energy. A sun-drenched desert with no solar panels. Many leaders treat change initiatives as something to be hatched in private and then foisted on employees. When they resist, the leaders act surprised and ask, "How do I get people to buy in?" Buy-in is code for, how do I get people to want what I want, rather than what they want. But that's backward. If you want to get out of a rut and leap forward, go where the energy is. Tap motivation. Assuming you've surfaced a handful of promising leverage points in the last section, ask yourself, which one of those interventions would be most enthusiastically embraced by my people? It's really not more complicated than that. In the Million Cat Challenge, Kate Hurley found that for many shelters, there was great enthusiasm for the return to field concept, which, recall, involved vaccinating and neutering/spaying cats, then releasing them back to the community. Why? Because the shelter employees were tired of coming to work every day and killing countless cats. It was crushing. As a result, there were vast reservoirs of motivation to tap. This kind of logic seems intuitive when it comes to externally focused work, in which you have to unite a group of partners around a common vision. You can't spark a movement if no one wants to move. But somehow the logic dissolves inside organizations. Possibly that's because we have just enough residual, command and control mentality to think, nah, I shouldn't have to mess with all this motivational stuff. People get paid to work. That should be enough motivation for them. And let's be clear, you absolutely can give orders. It will often work. But even when it works, the change will come slowly and grudgingly. Eventually, after enough pestering and threats, we all manage to watch those compliance videos and rack up the necessary continuing ed credits. Let's treat you, personally, as a focus group of one. Imagine a situation at work where you have to do something you don't like and you don't agree with. And now imagine a situation where you are doing what you love and believe in. What is the difference in your effort between those two situations? What's the difference in your effectiveness? When I ask people those questions, they don't cite modest improvement gains. I'm 7.3% better. They say they're dramatically more effective in the latter situation. Twice as effective, 3 times, even 10 times. That's the incentive for us to pay attention to motivation. And that's why, when it comes to change, the shortest route between 2 points is not always a straight line. Because if fueled by motivation you can go 3 times as fast on the circuitous route, you'll be wise to take that one. Tapping motivation is about finding the intersection of what's required and what's desired. The start area in the Venn diagram is your first move. Then again, the start area is only a subset of the changes you need to make. So what do you do about the unclaimed area to the left? That is, what if some of the changes you need to make to succeed aren't popular? When you're working with a team, there's not just one circle, i.e., one person's set of interests, but many. Given a team of people with different talents and interests, you'll likely have most of the coverage you need. Still, there's a gap in the picture above. What happens with the stuff that no one wants to do? Who manages the investors? Who tracks the invoices? Again, better to elicit action than simply to mandate it. In thinking through what your change demands, it's helpful to think in terms of activities. To get where we're trying to go, we'll need to invest more energy in making outbound sales calls, or managing accounts payable, writing the donor newsletter. The reason it's liberating to call out these activities is that you can map them to motivations. Like organizational matchmaking. This matching can take a surprisingly literal form. There's an idea called the genius swap that I learned from my friends Christine and Becky Margiotta. Christine invented the idea and Becky tried it with her team, which was leading a national campaign to get the most vulnerable homeless people off the street and into housing. Becky's team was gathered for an off-site retreat. A rare breather. Becky asked, each person on the team to grab some sticky notes. On each note, she said, write down one task that's on your plate today that you would pay someone to take over for you. Then, part 2, on different sticky notes, write down one task you'd be so excited to do that you'd pay for the privilege. Next, they posted everyone's sticky notes to the wall so they could look at them together. And Becky said it was magical, because you could see, right in front of you, that there were a bunch of matches. One person's pay to get rid of activities corresponded exactly to someone else's pay to take it on activities. One person hated budgeting. Another pined for it. Becky herself scored a match. Fatigued from traveling, she was eager to offload the need to speak at regional meetings and conferences, a critical way of attracting interest in the campaign. Meanwhile, one of her colleagues, Linda, was chomping at the bit to do more traveling and speaking. So they just swapped. Not everything was neatly swappable, of course. But Becky said that, for her, the swaps were only a small part of the value. Consider the list of activities that people said they'd pay to take on. Becky's attitude was, everything on that list is a yes. Yes, you can do that. If people were that excited about something, she figured they would invest the energy to do it well, and the organization would benefit. Meanwhile, for the pay to get rid of activities that didn't find a match, she'd promise the team to work on them. Were those tasks really necessary? In the spirit of Chapter 7, could they be shifted right? Or, when they had the funding for another employee, could they bundle up the unloved activities and hire someone who adored them? That's how you unleash motivation. Now, I do want to acknowledge that for many HR and legal employees, the above paragraphs may have triggered a seizure. In large organizations, this kind of shapeshifting can be complicated. For small organizations, by contrast, I refuse to believe that you shouldn't run a genius swap every year for the rest of time. There is value in standardizing roles. It's nice when employees can shift from one plant to another, or one region to another, and still fit in smoothly, because the roles are the same. But we sometimes act as though an employee's highest calling is to stay safely within the bullet points of their job description. The reality, though, is that when we don't tap motivation, we squander it. It's like a hydropower project that runs on the flows from garden hoses, predictable and controllable, while ignoring the massive and messy waterfall nearby. 3. When you're struggling to propel yourself forward, your best move is to harness the waterfall. That was what Diane Connery learned in Pottsboro, Texas, a town of about 2,500 people, 75 miles north of Dallas, up near the Oklahoma border. Some small towns have a beautiful little courthouse, that kind of thing, said Connery. This is a poor small town. It's not modern. It's not quaint. It's rusted metal buildings. In 2010, Connery, cajoled by a friend, began attending the Pottsboro Library Board meetings. The library had roughly the same charm as the town. Housed in the former post office, it was a 3,600 square foot box stocked full of dusty old pulp novels that no one read. Chronically understaffed, with volunteers only, and underfunded, its future looked hopeless. When I got involved, we were preparing to shut down, said Connery in a public talk. Every board meeting was just this discussion of, how much money do we have left? How many more months can we keep going until we have to close? They were such a downer. New ideas tended to be greeted with an enthusiastic smothering. At one point, a board member wondered whether the library's meeting room could be offered for free to community groups. That way, at least people would be coming in and out of the building. It would be a start. That suggestion launched a series of discussions about the rules and policies that should govern such usage, and the importance of posting those rules publicly, and the need for each group using the meeting space to provide a written attestation that they would abide by the full set of rules, one of those rules being that under no circumstances should people bring shrimp to their meetings, because one time long ago somebody had let shrimp tails slip down the drain and they ended up stinking up the place so badly that it was deemed crucial to ban the species from the premises. Connery called this the shrimp tail doctrine, a misguided obsession with rules and policies at the expense of the bigger picture, that bigger picture being that the library was dying, barring a radical rejuvenation. Feeling there was little to lose, Connery agreed to take over the library as a volunteer. Her leadership strategy was inspired by a Seinfeld episode called The Opposite. In one scene, George Costanza, sitting in a diner with Jerry and Elaine, is bemoaning his life choices. George Costanza, it became very clear to me sitting out there today that every decision I've ever made, in my entire life, has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be. Every instinct I have, in every aspect of life, be it something to wear, something to eat, it's all been wrong. Jerry Seinfeld, if every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right. George Costanza, yes, I will do the opposite. I used to sit here and do nothing, and regret it for the rest of the day, so now I will do the opposite, and I will do something. Inspired, George gets up and approaches an attractive woman sitting at the counter. My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents. Attractive woman, I'm Victoria. Hi. Connery, channeling George Costanza, decided to do the opposite of almost everything the library had been doing. She abandoned the shrimp tail doctrine. What if we find ways to encourage people to come and then figure it out? It was obvious to me that we needed to reach people who never use the library, Connery said. We had to fight the preconception of what a library offers. What followed was an explosion of activities, attractions, and outreach. Like cooking classes on how to feed a family on a tight budget. A library of things, where patrons could check out canning supplies, bicycles, sewing machines, or a power washer. A Friday night, cocktails and coloring fundraiser, which featured adult coloring books and drinks from a new distillery in a nearby town. To make room for more of these programs, she did what some library diehards considered sacrilege. She brought in a tractor trailer to get rid of thousands of books, romance novels, outdated encyclopedias, and more that no one had checked out in 10 years or more. The new library was about saying yes, harnessing the enthusiasm of community members. That's the waterfall approach. Find the natural energy and channel it to do work. People will volunteer and get excited about things that are meaningful to them, Connery said. She told Pottsboro citizens, fit in where your passion is. If you have an interest in something, go for it. And I'm not going to micromanage it. Not everything worked. A much-hyped movie night drew an underwhelming 10 people. A community garden, which had received a burst of initial caretaking, eventually withered from inattention. But other initiatives drew audiences who had never been library patrons before. Teens flocked to play esports. Seniors came in to learn to use tablet computers or to get their wills notarized. A telemedicine program, for which the library eventually became an exemplar, brought in community members who needed health care. And sometimes they just did things for the sheer joy of doing them. Just before the library replaced its aging carpet, the staff brought in a pair of miniature horses for a summer event. Because if you're gonna trash the carpets, why not really trash the carpets? The place was packed wall to wall with kids, all gaga for the furry guests. The local newspaper covered the scene, featuring this photo that would make David Lynch smile. I can't help thinking that, at some subconscious level perhaps, the miniature horse visit was orchestrated specifically to torment the shrimp tail people. Now, granted, there is a kitchen sink energy to these experiments. The library went from trying nothing to trying everything. But the efforts weren't random. Underlying the efforts was a clear and simple strategy. Connery believed that the library could not survive without ongoing government support. And that support had to be earned. The library had to convince taxpayers that it was worth the investment. The leverage point was citizens getting increasingly attached to the place. What will make this place so important to the community that there would be rioting in the streets if we had to close, said Connery in her public talk. The rioting proved unnecessary because the strategy worked. More and more people came to the library, more and more often. It became a social hub. Since 2011, it has effectively been enshrined in the town budget, which saved it from the brink of financial collapse. Librarians from around the country started paying attention to the Pottsboro story, because in a time when many libraries were struggling, here was a small institution in a small town in Texas with nothing going for it, no endowment, no snazzy building, no special collections that remade itself to suit the needs of its community. A library that made itself indispensable by tapping motivation. 4. To reset your efforts, you need to tap motivation, just as Connery did in Pottsboro. Sometimes, though, the initial enthusiasm for change can be fleeting. To stay in motion, to keep pushing forward, requires you to sustain motivation. And one of the best tools for sustaining motivation is recognition. You get what you celebrate, said Frank Blake, the former CEO of Home Depot. After Blake became CEO in 2007, he stressed 5 specific areas for improvement, the most important of which was customer service. He wanted associates to feel empowered to take care of customers. But Home Depot had hundreds of thousands of employees. It was hard to break through with a message. Most executives in this situation seem to instinctively lob bland bromides. At Home Depot, we take pride in standing behind you, our trusted employees, as empowered agents of empowerment. But Blake took a different approach. No one gives a rat's ass what your memo says, he said. At one point, Blake had the chance to speak to about 3,000 store managers. And he used that forum to retell a story he'd heard. At a Home Depot store in North Georgia, a customer, an older gentleman, was checking out with a cartload of lumber. The cashier asked him whether he'd found everything he needed. He said he had. Then, making conversation, she asked what project he was working on. The man paused. Then he replied that his grandson had passed away, and he had decided to build the coffin with his own hands. The cashier immediately replied, "Please, sir, don't even think of paying," and waved him through the line. When Blake shared that story with his store managers, he said, "You could have heard a pin drop." Why did Blake share that particular story? It was certainly memorable, surprising and moving. And the cashier who was praised must have felt good about the recognition. But Blake's actual goal was to conjure a vision and motivate his team to achieve it. He was saying, implicitly, here's what it means to deliver amazing customer service. In this case, it meant giving away our products for free. This cashier didn't ask the boss for permission, she just did it. And not only is that okay with me, I'm going out of my way to praise this woman in front of all of you. Blake became a zealot for the power of recognition. When managers would approach him for more resources, he'd say, "Don't talk to me about your resource allocation until you've told me you've burned all your free fuel." When they asked what he meant by free fuel, he'd say, "Your free fuel is praise and recognition. You come in and tell me how you're praising and recognizing your people to get where we need to go. And then we'll talk about resources." Blake didn't just talk about recognition, he modeled it. He was known for sending handwritten notes to employees thanking them with specific details for things they had done. He spent every Sunday afternoon writing those notes. And he wrote thousands of them. Here's the CEO of a Fortune 50 company, devoting part of every weekend to celebrating his people. That's how powerfully he believed in recognition. As you make progress toward your new goal, make sure that what you celebrate is aligned with where you're headed. You've got to figure out what you need and celebrate the people who lead the way, Blake said. 5. As much as I believe in everything positive and constructive that has preceded this sentence, I also believe that there is a countervailing truth of human nature. Where there is change, there is resistance. No matter how enlightened your methods, there will be people on your team who will dig in their heels. There was surely one person in the ballroom listening to Frank Blake's talk who, after hearing the story about the grandfather building his grandson's coffin, thought to himself, "This is ridiculous. That guy should have paid for the wood." What do you do about the resistors in your midst? Let's break down some numbers for a moment. For any particular change goal, there will always be people who are with you from the start. Let's say 20%. If there's literally no one who's with you, you have the wrong change goal. Full stop. There will be a larger group, 60%, in the middle who are indifferent or swayable. And the remainder, 20%, will be against you. For the resistors, let's recall a Ken Davis, Gartner, quote from Chapter 3, "If you want change, you've either got to change the people, or change the people. The latter is always an option. It's painful to let people go, but don't forget it's also painful for everyone else to deal with the constant negativity and foot dragging. There's no pain-free option, in other words. For now, though, let's assume that letting people go is a last resort and focus instead on ways to improve your odds with the current team intact. Here are 3 thoughts to guide your work. First, don't make the mistake of accepting these 20/60/20 numbers as inevitable. Might there be another leverage point where the numbers would be more favorable? What if there's another leverage point, perhaps slightly less attractive in pure strategic terms, that would attract 80% enthusiasts instead of 20%? Well, do that first. Go where the energy is. Second, if there's not a better leverage point, then could you barter with the middle 60% and the resistant 20% to make the change more exciting? Maybe. There are some problems or irritants that you could resolve for them. If you'll help me with this, I'll help you with that. Remember how, in the hospital receiving area story that began the book, the leader canvassed the employees for nuisances he could fix, like the erratic cartwheels. Or could you reconfigure their responsibilities to add some appeal? In other words, even if the change as a whole is unmotivating to them, could they take charge of some aspects that are more in keeping with their interests, a la the genius swap? Finally, how could you tap the energy of your pro-change faction to score some quick wins? Because visible progress changes minds. Tapping the sign. Again, of all the things that can boost emotions, motivation, and perceptions during a workday, the single most important is making progress in meaningful work. No one in the hospital receiving area was hungrily awaiting the chance to reinvent the way they worked. Their enthusiasm had to be earned. And it was earned by showing them that their effort would bear fruit. That it would make their lives less stressful. And, most important, that it would help the people they served, the doctors and nurses waiting to receive time-sensitive supplies. An empty room is a beautiful thing, man. Our goal is to tap motivation to yield progress, and then use the evidence of that progress to motivate others, whose kindled enthusiasm can then be tapped for still more energy. That cycle can fuel your forward movement. Progress is the spark that makes believers of skeptics. These numbers are made up, of course, but I've heard these exact numbers 20/60/20 from enough different leaders that I've come to believe there must be some folk wisdom behind them. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 9, Tap Motivation. 1. The fourth way to restack resources on leverage points is to harness motivation. Think of it like a sun-drenched desert with no solar panels. It could provide valuable energy, but only if it's tapped. 2. If you want to fuel change, pay attention to what your constituents want, considering their interests and desires. Ezra Fox's "Hide the Evidence" idea tapped his kids' natural interest in games, as opposed to trying to convince them to be interested in cleaning. Dr. Doug Eby explained to his diabetic patient why better self-care would honor the most important things in his life: his desire to hunt and fish with his grandkids. 3. Tapping motivation is about finding the intersection of what's required and what's desired. Remember the Venn diagram illustrating that 4. Your teammates will have different interests. How can you ensure that those interests can be channeled toward what's required? Consider a genius swap, the idea that you can simply trade responsibilities according to interest. Becky Margiotta and her team found some easy swaps to make. Becky traded her public speaking to Linda. More broadly, the exercise helped surface where people's individual passions lay. 5. To restack resources on your leverage points, don't think how do I get buy-in for my idea. Think, instead, how could I harness the waterfall of available motivation to propel a new effort? Diane Connery revived the dying Pottsboro Library by finding pockets of passion that could be yoked to the mission of the library. Ultimately, she made the library indispensable to the community. 6. How do you handle change skeptics? Try 1. Picking a leverage point with more. 10. Let people drive. You can restack resources on your leverage points by giving your team the autonomy to own the change effort. Let people drive. 1. When patients' kidneys fail, they must undergo dialysis, a procedure where a machine, the dialyzer, filters their blood, acting as artificial kidneys. Dialysis can be a grueling process. Patients might have to visit a center for 3-4 hour sessions every week, attached to a machine, sitting quietly in a hushed environment, with too much time to think. And barring a transplant, patients with kidney failure will continue on dialysis for the rest of their lives. Richard Gibney, an experienced nephrologist, kidney doctor, based in Waco, Texas, had assumed that was the way dialysis would always be. A necessary evil. Then he attended a conference where a speaker told the story of Christian Farman, a young Swedish man who had asked to take over his own dialysis. A nurse, Britt-Marie Bank, agreed to train him, and within 5 weeks, he was mostly self-sufficient. Farman's clinic, inspired by his example, started offering self-dialysis to other patients, and the practice spread quickly. Not only were patients able to handle the technical side of the work, they seemed to thrive as a result. In control of their care, they reshaped that dull dialysis time. Some of them actually exercised during their self-treatments, riding stationary bikes or lifting weights. Gibney, amazed and excited, returned to his clinic, evangelizing for self-care. Dialysis. My team thought I was crazy, he wrote online. Trying to convince his colleagues that the idea wasn't ludicrous, he actually flew over Christian Farman and Bank from Sweden to Waco. Gibney remembers their visit. They began by politely asking questions. Would you be willing to turn the dialysis machine to face the patients? Would you give patients permission to touch the machines? Would you let patients insert the needles into their own bodies? These inquiries represented the diametric opposite of our practice at the time. Up until then, we pretty much told patients to sit down, put out your arm, be quiet, and don't touch anything. We were polite, but that was essentially our protocol. Much as I hate to admit it now, our treatment encouraged boredom, depression, and learned helplessness. Some of Gibney's colleagues were open to the idea but had reservations about it. Mary Smith, a nurse, wondered whether patients would be capable of shouldering the work. Sometimes even the patient's own family members were skeptical. But Smith was surprised by how many patients volunteered for self-care. As a result, her own role shifted. She became a coach as well as a caregiver. She'd tell the patients, "You're gonna watch me do this, and then you're gonna do it." But it wasn't just one-way communication. The self-care patients started catching mistakes, the wrong dose of heparin, or the wrong set of lines. Gibney said that the dialysis centers started to feel more collegial and collaborative, less like an assembly line. Gibney and his staff were letting the patients drive. To let people drive is to give them autonomy, the freedom to manage their own work. Gibney often repeated a quote from Warner Slack: "The least utilized resource in medicine is the patient." This isn't an argument for total freedom. Autonomy is not always better. It's possible to go too far, as we'll see. But the benefits of letting people drive are profound. So profound, in fact, that it's hard to imagine a high-functioning team that lacks a strong measure of autonomy. Gibney's clinic experienced these benefits. When people from other dialysis centers came to visit, self-care dialysis was still very much a novelty. They were shocked. They'd say, "This is unbelievable," recalled Gibney. "We've never seen a happy dialysis unit." Eugene Payne, a 62-year-old from Canton, Michigan, learned the ins and outs of self-care dialysis from watching YouTube videos, including Gibney's. Being mechanically inclined, he was motivated to take more control of the process. He was the first person in his facility to ask for self-care. For him, the payoff was immense. "It's a reward that I just can't explain," he said. I'm not letting my illness hold me back. I look forward to doing it. I'm not depressed about dialysis. Patients like Payne were extremely conscientious about the procedure, for obvious reasons. When I look at the machine, that's my life, Payne said. That is what's keeping me alive. Perhaps because of this extra caution, it wasn't just the patient experience that improved from self-care dialysis, it was the medical outcomes, too. At Gibney's clinic, a year after launching the experiment, the self-care patients were experiencing fewer emergencies, only 0.7 hospitalizations per patient, compared to 1.9 per patient for traditional dialysis. Smith, the nurse, said that the embrace of self-care dialysis had changed her. It opened my eyes, my heart to the fact that people are amazing and capable of a lot, even in the most scary and overwhelming circumstances, she said. And if you believe in them and give them permission, they will rise. 2. Letting people drive is naturally motivating. In that sense, granting autonomy is a continuation of the themes of the previous chapter, tap motivation. But letting people drive has a second advantage that is less intuitive. It's something we'll discover in the story of Guy Kruger. A fraction of an inch shifted Kruger's fate. In 2008, Kruger was competing in the trials for a spot on the U.S. Olympic archery team. It came down to the last attempt. The arrows flew, and Kruger's was judged barely out, his rivals barely in. And that was it, his Olympic dream was over. Kruger decided it was time for him to switch to coaching, and he took a role at the Olympic Training Center. Basically in a span of 3 weeks, I went from competing against these athletes to coaching and having some type of leadership role over them, he said. Not a super successful transition. Unsuccessful because Kruger tried to coach athletes in the same semi-authoritarian way he'd been coached himself. I tried to be really direct, like, here's the information, take it or leave it, he said. Then, he admitted, well, actually, not even, take it or leave it. It was just, do this. A few years later, it was time to prepare for the 2012 Olympics. By tradition, the athletes got to select the 2 coaches who would travel with them to the Olympic Games. I just knew that they would select me, he said. There were only 2 coaches who worked with the athletes daily. 2 coaches, 2 slots. Simple math. But they didn't pick him. Instead of Kruger, they chose another coach, one who helped out less frequently. Kruger was shocked. He would miss the Olympics for a second time. A year later his health deteriorated. He sustained a pretty horrific back injury and was bedridden for several months before surgery. During this miserable time, not one athlete called or visited or texted to see how he was doing. When the people that you're working with day in and day out in like 60 hours a week at that time don't notice that you're not there, or reach out, it's pretty eye-opening, he said. It was a painful wake-up call. After successful surgery got him back on his feet, he enrolled himself in a training program for coaches. He wanted help. His conversion moment came when he was exposed to the work of the sports scientist Gabrielle Wulf and her approach to harnessing the focus and motivation of athletes. Coaches shouldn't act like a boss and tell athletes what to do, she advised. They should elicit. They should guide. Specifically, a coach should push athletes focus outward and channel their own desires as the force of improvement. Because the coach can't shoot the arrows for them. The coach should let the athletes drive. Kruger saw the wisdom of that approach immediately. From the training, he learned to give feedback differently. Traditionally, archery coaches had been hyper-focused on muscle movements. Set your hand at this angle. Grip the bow. Like this. Keep your tricep tight. Squeeze your back together. Even for experienced athletes, though, that advice could be paralyzing. Am I really doing it right? Is my tricep tight? What if the muscle movements look right from the outside but are not right internally? Channeling Wulf's advice, Kruger turned athletes' focus outward, away from their muscles. Now he'd tell an athlete, imagine the sleeve of your shirt moving back behind you. Or, shoot the arrow through the target, not just to it. Notice that this language gives direction but allows for adaptation. Different Athletes can respond to the prompts in different ways, using different muscle patterns, while still succeeding. Wolf calls this technique external focus. 2. A more profound shift for Kruger was abandoning the practice of giving direct instruction to athletes. Now, Kruger elicits goals from athletes and helps them get what they want. Here's a sample conversation he modeled to illustrate the process. Kruger, what do you want to focus on today? Archer, I want to focus on my mental process. Kruger, okay, run me through it. What does that normally look like? Archer, describes it. Kruger, okay, now do a shot for me so I can see what that looks like. In real time as you're running that through your head. The archer prepares and takes a shot. Kruger, alright, can you rate that on a 1 to 10 scale of how good it was, with 10 being where you want to be? Archer, oh, that was a 5. Kruger, what would it take for it to be an 8? Archer, well, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Kruger, okay, let's see if you can do those things this time. This coaching is flipped. Instead of pushing ideas onto the athletes, Kruger pulls ideas from them. They set the goals, he doesn't. They provide the assessment, he doesn't. Kruger was transformed as a coach. Now he let athletes take the lead, and it didn't take long for him to rebuild their trust in him. I remember one of the athletes said one day, I don't know what you're doing differently, but we like it, said Kruger. 3. In early 2015, he was named the women's head coach for USA Archery. By October 2015, the women's team was ranked second in the world, up from 18th. The year prior, it was the team's highest world ranking ever. Meanwhile, Kruger was so excited about what he'd learned that he eventually stopped training archers and started training other coaches. He now serves as the director of education at USA Archery. 3. In situations where we want to see quick improvement, we often have the instinct to take more control. We grab the wheel ourselves. I'll just take over. I'll just tell them what to do. But that's exactly the wrong approach, because we need people's investment and their energy. That was the lesson Kruger learned. But let's look at his story through another lens. When Kruger was micromanaging the athletes, he was expending a lot of energy that was not valued by the customer, the athlete. The instruction was both unwanted and ineffective. What does that sound like? Yep, waste. And this is the second part of the justification for letting people drive. It both boosts motivation and reduces waste. It cuts waste by reducing micromanagement. Recall that another form of waste is non-utilized talent. As you read in Chapter 7, it's wasteful when people are playing below their level. Autonomy helps people operate at the top of their range. When you're in charge of something, you act with more conscientiousness and tap more of your skills than if you're a cog in the machine. With self-dialysis, the patient becomes an active contributor, rather than a passive recipient of care. Note that autonomy is not miracle dust. It's not an unbounded positive. If all employees could do whatever they wanted at any given time, one fears that the very institution of staff meetings could crumble and fall. It's not even clear that employees want unlimited freedom themselves. Years ago, I did a survey asking people to describe the best and worst jobs they'd had in their lives. One consistent theme in the worst jobs was feeling disempowered. Here's one person: I felt like I was wasting my time and energy. I started doing less because it was easier on my ego than creating work that was crushed. I learned to do exactly what the boss asked and nothing more, so pretty much I was an extension of his work, which didn't make me feel valued at all. In other words, this person not only wasn't allowed to drive, they were practically locked in the trunk. But, interestingly, almost no one said that their best job was when they had complete autonomy. Many people, reflecting on their best jobs, remarked that they had a clear understanding of what was expected of them. They were supported in their roles. They were mentored. That's not a cry to be left alone. People do want to drive. But they also want guardrails and a safety net if something goes wrong. So ultimately, it seems, the desire is for bounded autonomy. How do you manage that tension between fewer constraints and more support? One inspiration comes from Spotify, the company behind the music and audio streaming app. In a great video describing Spotify's engineering culture, the coach and consultant Henrik Naberg highlights the concepts of autonomy and alignment. He points out that, at first glance, these concepts seem like they're two different ends of the same scale. Illustrations adapted from Henrik Naberg's video, Spotify Engineering Culture. But, Naberg said, Spotify thinks of these as two independent dimensions. And, reader, no business book is complete until you have seen a 2x2 matrix. Here is yours. With low autonomy and low alignment, as shown above, it's a micromanagement culture. Just be quiet and do what I say. Ken Blanchard said. The opposite of trust is not distrust, it's control. One square up from that, you've still got low autonomy but better alignment. In that upper left square, Naberg says, leaders are good at communicating what problem needs to be solved, but they're also telling people how to solve it. That's the way Guy Kruger, the archery coach, originally taught his athletes, do this, do that. The bottom right, high autonomy but low alignment, means teams do whatever they want and basically all run in different directions. Leaders are helpless and our product becomes a Frankenstein that looks like this. As per usual with 2x2s, the most desirable real estate is in the upper right, which in this case represents aligned autonomy, meaning that leaders focus on what problems to solve, but let the teams figure out how to solve it. The stronger alignment we have, the more autonomy we can afford to grant. Naberg said. Here's aligned autonomy. Management says, we need to cross the river, figure out how. For that's aligned autonomy. It's Spotify's approach. It's Guy Kruger's approach. It's the self-dialysis clinic's approach. And, if we want to bring the maximum force to bear as we restack resources, it should be our approach as well. 4. One interesting dilemma is, how do you move between locations in the 2x2? If you're stuck in one of the low autonomy squares, could you ever shift to the upper right, high alignment, high autonomy? That ambitious shift was proposed at T-Mobile in 2015 by a leader named Callie Field. As Executive Vice President of Customer Care, Field was in charge of the company's call centers, and up until that point, T-Mobile's call centers had been managed as so-called cost centers, meaning that the less spent to operate them, the better. Why invest lavishly in something that doesn't bring in money? Or so the logic goes. When you have this cost center mindset, you have a perverse incentive to try to deter customers from calling you. So you bury the 1-800 number. Redirect people to self-service tools. Make people wait when they call, knowing some of them will give up. And for those who persevere, you train your call center reps to rush them off the phone as quickly as possible. Field proposed a radical rethink. What if customer support wasn't managed as a drain on business but as a way to cultivate business? Consider the goal of the goal. She proposed a dedicated team model for T-Mobile's customers. It was called Team of Experts, or TEX. The 47-person teams would be organized by geography. One specific team at T-Mobile might be responsible for, say, 120,000 customers in Detroit. The reps on that team would no longer receive a random cross-section of calls every day. Instead, every single call they fielded would be from Detroit. And everyone sitting around them would also be taking calls from Detroit. The redesign was inspired by support operations in B2B companies, in which each client might have a dedicated team to assist them. Over time, that team would get to know the client well. That knowledge would lead to better service. The relationship would deepen. In the end, we had a simple goal, customer happiness, Field told Matthew Dixon, who wrote about T-Mobile for Harvard Business Review. The story here draws heavily on Dixon's account. We figured happy customers would stay longer, spend more with us, and recommend us to others. In the TEX model, their incentives would be different, too. Most call centers focused on minimizing call time. But the TEX teams had different priorities. Retaining customers, growing their business, reducing their calls not by making it harder for them to call, but by solving issues on the first try. So, to get back to the Spotify 2x2, what T-Mobile was proposing was a vault. From the lower left square to the upper right. Before, the call center reps acted as solo agents, receiving a never-ending stream of random calls monitored and micromanaged throughout the day. After the shift to techs, though, they'd be part of a team given the autonomy to manage a specific set of customers with certain clear goals in mind. Autonomy plus alignment. This was audacious thinking. And there were plenty of tech skeptics even within T-Mobile. I can't tell you how many people were running around thinking that we were going to totally blow up the cost structure, said John Freer, president of the consumer group. Hundreds of millions of dollars are going to be added into the cost structure, and this is going to be a complete and colossal failure. The cost worries were real. Field and Freer knew that techs would require an enormous upfront investment. Worse, they knew that the model would make the call center less efficient. The average call time, a critical metric in most call centers, would increase. Not temporarily, but forever. Because building relationships takes longer. The dedicated support model had worked in B2B, which gave them some faith. But B2B support operations are comparatively low volume. If you support a small number of major clients, you can get to know them pretty well. With techs, though, the teams would deal with huge populations. Even the bubbliest extrovert couldn't hope to get to know 120,000 people in Detroit. Would knowledge of the area, not the client, be sufficient to provide better service? Ultimately, they made the bet and spent the millions to bring techs to life. The call centers were redesigned so that everyone on a techs team could sit together. The team members serving Detroit, for instance, sat together in Chattanooga. They decorated their area with Motor City signage and pennants from the Detroit Tigers and Pistons. A rep in Idaho who served San Diego told Dixon, "We're constantly talking about what's happening there. I've never been to San Diego, but I know what's going on in the local news, where the best places for fish tacos, and what the surf report looks like for the next few days." As hoped, the techs model made the reps more responsive to customers. When a brush fire caused an outage in San Diego, T-Mobile customers started calling to complain. In the old model, a rep unfamiliar with the situation would have apologized generically, promised to file a report with engineering. With techs, though, the team knew what was happening, because they were talking to each other throughout the day. The rep could reply immediately, "Yes, we are tracking the fire, and we've spoken with the engineers on the ground, and they are estimating that service will return within 24 hours. The model was remarkably successful. By the first quarter of 2018, techs had scored a rare triple win for company, customers, and employees. For T-Mobile, the cost to serve customers was down by 13% from 2016. This was driven by a 21% reduction in calls per account. Getting things right the first time worked. For customers, the model made support easier. Transferred calls were way down. And they appreciated the team's familiarity with their area net promoter score jumped from 43% to 67%. Best of all, employees felt like less of a cog in the techs model. It offered autonomy and camaraderie. As a result, absenteeism dropped 24% and staff turnover plunged from 42% annually to 22%. Those are eye-popping numbers. For a customer service environment, the success of the techs model provides us a nice opportunity to review the lessons of the Restack Resources section. T-Mobile's leaders had a goal: customer happiness, as Callie Field said. And they'd identified a leverage point: better service as a driver of happiness, in pursuit of that goal. So how did they restack resources on that leverage point? First, they recycled waste by trying to eliminate a customer's need to place a second or third call to get issues resolved. By handling problems on the first call, even if that first contact took a bit longer, a lot of wasteful activity was prevented. Second, as we've stressed in this chapter, they let people drive. The very heart of the techs model, after all, was to give call center employees more ownership over their work. That autonomy fueled progress. Third, and this anticipates the final part of the Restack Resources section, the text teams benefited from quicker learning. As an example, a team covering Salt Lake City noticed that many young people were calling to cancel their accounts. Together, the team members pieced together the story. Young Mormons were preparing to leave on their 2-year missions. At that time, they were forbidden to bring phones. But following a bit of legwork, the team discovered that the young missionaries could bring tablets. Now, when those young Mormons called to cancel, the T-Mobile reps simply offered to switch their service to a tablet and even offered to provide the tablet for free. That helped the missionaries, and it helped T-Mobile. Notice that in a traditional call center, this insight would have stayed buried. A large call center might employ tens of thousands of people. In that context, even if 10 different young missionaries called to cancel their phones on the same day, no one would notice. The numbers are just too big. But if that happened 10 times across a smaller group of people, said Freer, they're going to talk about that. Because at the beginning of the day, they're going to have a huddle. At the end of the day, they're going to have a huddle. What did you hear? What are our customers telling us about? Well, I had a customer. I can't believe they're calling in because they're going on a mission for 2 years and they're calling. Oh, I had that happen, too. Me too. And before you know it, because of that kind of an insight that a local team is having, you can then have a discussion about how we can solve that. In a national global call routing scheme, it's just almost impossible. Notice that the data was always in the system. Missionaries had always called. Before TEX, though, the support team would have been blind to the pattern. But with the new model, when one person learned something important, everyone learned it. The company had, in essence, built a better circulatory system for information. And that's the final step in our quest to stack up resources, the desire to accelerate our learning. The speaker was Maureen Bisognano from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, IHI. A shout out to the IHI, which I have found to be a consistent source of inspiration over the years and across many books. They do excellent quality improvement work in healthcare. And I'd strongly encourage any reader in the healthcare industry to get involved with them. Read their newsletters, attend their conferences, etc. Learning about Wolf's work struck a nostalgic chord with me, because it reminded me of my junior high school football coach. I can only remember 3 things he said. 2 of them, I realized, were external focus cues. In the weight room, he'd tell us to hug the log. When we were doing dumbbell flies for barbell squats, he'd tell us to push through the floor. Classic external focus. He was way ahead of his time. By the way, for completeness, the 3rd thing I remember him saying was, "Your dog in it, Heath." Which was rude but fair. 3 These are Olympic caliber athletes, of course, which means they are very capable of driving. You couldn't very well start a kid's first guitar lesson with the prompt, "So, what do you want to focus on today?" Beginners will obviously need more direction. But even in these beginner situations, it is crazy not to pay attention to their motivation. If a kid wants to learn how to play yesterday, then that's the fuel the teacher needs to sustain their interest in practice. For an even better approach, riffing on the themes from the last chapter on tapping motivation, would be if management said, "To finish our mission, we could either climb the steep hill or cross the river. Pick whichever one you're more excited about and then figure out how." Whirlwind Review, Chapter 10, Let People Drive. 1. Letting people drive is the 5th way to restack resources. Autonomy works because it's motivating, it instills more accountability, it taps higher order skills, and it reduces waste. From micromanagement. Richard Gibney allowed his patients to perform self-dialysis, and the results were strikingly positive. The least utilized resource in medicine is the patient. 2. In uncertain, anxiety-making situations, you may be tempted to grab for control. But that's the wrong instinct. You need to let people drive. The archery coach Guy Kruger realized that he'd been micromanaging talented athletes who were more effective when they led the training. B. As we saw in Chapter 7, excess management is waste. It squanders managerial time and caps employees' effectiveness. 3. Autonomy is not an unbounded positive, though either for the quality of the work or for the motivation of the employees. In a survey, people reported wanting guidance and support. 4. Spotify has a nice way of blending freedom and guidance. They try to support a high autonomy, high alignment culture. Leaders focus on what problems to solve, but let the teams figure out how to solve it. 5. It's possible to shift to a high autonomy, high alignment culture with the right support, systems and incentives. At T-Mobile, the TEX model transformed customer service from a solo sport to a team sport. Each TEX team was given ownership over a set of customer relationships. 11. Accelerate learning. You can restack resources on your leverage points by getting better, faster feedback to fuel improvements. Accelerate learning. 1. Moon Javed, the chief strategy officer for the San Francisco 49ers, was the guy responsible for ensuring that 49ers fans had a good time at the team's games. 4 years, Javed and his staff had relied on fan surveys to guide them. Fans often complained, for example, about how long it took to get out of the parking lot after a game. One problem was that everybody took the shortest path to their own car. The result was chaos. No one could drive efficiently because there were people wandering everywhere. So Javed's team put up some ropes to channel the flow of people to different parts of the lot. Suddenly the parking lot looked more like an orderly Disney World queue than a Black Friday Walmart. A few days after the end of the 2016 season, Javed and his boss, Al Guido, the team president, were reviewing some possible changes based on fan feedback. "You know, we've only got 10 shots a year to get this right," Guido said, referring to the number of 49ers home games, including the preseason. "So if we're just waiting for the next game to improve things, we've already missed 10% of the customer's experience." Guido challenged Javed to make improvements in real time. Could they monitor fan feedback and act on it immediately? Guido's real-time data prompt was a compelling idea for change, but Javed had no idea how to accomplish it. No other NFL team had any kind of real-time feedback engine, much less the ability to act on that feedback instantly. Javed researched alternatives and found some survey apps that could compile data instantly. It was nifty technology, but he just couldn't imagine it working. Would 70,000 fans really pull out their phones during a game and do a survey? It seemed like a dead end. Then, in an airport one day, he stumbled across a Happy or Not terminal, a device designed to gather quick customer feedback. The terminals, often stationed just outside a TSA checkpoint or inside a bathroom, have 4 buttons: big smile, little frown, and big frown. Javed had seen them before, but it suddenly clicked for him: this could be my solution. "I literally sat down for an hour, missed my flight on purpose, and just waited and watched to see if people would hit the button," he said. "I was actually surprised because I had never hit one of those buttons in my life, but I saw a large number of people hit them. And I thought, okay, this could be interesting." He imagined installing terminals outside concession stands, inside bathrooms, near the front gates. The stadium could be wired up, and for the first time, he could monitor the fan experience in real time. Excited, Javed called the Happy or Not sales department, only to discover that they couldn't provide real-time data. The company typically sent out summary reports to clients on the day after data was collected, which wouldn't work, of course. Next day feedback was pointless for an event. Yesterday, fans were super unhappy about restroom 41. "Just thought you should know." Javed lobbied the Happy or Not team to build out a real-time app for the 49ers. "We'll be your guinea pigs," he told them, "and you can resell the tech to other customers." The idea appealed to them, so they started designing it. The 49ers quickly became a major account for Happy or Not. The stadium had 600 points of sale and 50 restrooms, so in the past, no manager could keep tabs on everything. It was too much. "For an NFL game, you are going to have a lot of problems," said Javed. "You're bussing in about 3,500 temporary employees. You have 60,000 people coming in at one time. Buildings just aren't Meant to be shocked like that. Toilets aren't meant to be flushed that way. With 150 terminals installed at key locations, though, the fans button pushes vastly expanded what the managers could monitor. During games, when a terminal logged a certain threshold of negative feedback, 15 people complaining within a 5-minute time frame, it could automatically send alerts to the person in charge: get to concession stand B1, or get to restroom 18. The app couldn't explain what was wrong. It just knew that people were unhappy. Initially, the staffers were nervous about this ambiguity. What if they couldn't figure out what's wrong? But once they started using the system, they realized the problems were usually obvious. A toilet was clogged. The stand was out of hot dog buns. One exception that proved a genuine mystery: during one game, the app flagged a concession stand that served alcohol. Lots of frowny button pushes. The staff rushed there but couldn't detect a problem. After some fruitless investigation, they gave up, but the red alerts kept coming. Javed insisted they go back until they figured out the problem, and eventually, they cracked it. A wine fridge was broken. Customers had been paying for warm white wine. By 2019, the 49ers were receiving 40,000 button pushes per game, 40,000. New data points. 2 for the team. This avalanche of data proved difficult to analyze. Clogged toilets were easy to act on. But what else did all that data tell them? So Javed's team invested in brain-friendly data visualizations that allowed them to see and understand the feedback in real time. The visualizations also unearthed unexpected insights. With concessions, comparing numbers across games proved to be tricky. As an example, look at the 2 heat maps on the opposite page. The X marks show problem areas. The first map shows the fans' feedback in a game against the Cowboys. They are not happy. There are many trouble spots around the stadium. The second image below shows the heat map a few weeks later, at a comparable point in the game against the Jaguars. Note there's only one trouble spot, at the top. What would you guess went wrong in the Cowboys game? The top picture. Supply outage? Staffing problem? The explanation is that in the Cowboys game, the 49ers were losing badly. And that made everything seem worse. The bathrooms seemed dirtier. The beer didn't seem as cold. Fan satisfaction during a win averaged 78%, while during a loss, it was 61%. Because of the huge winning/losing gap, Javed's team learned to compare apples with apples. If they were monitoring concession stand performance during a losing game, they made sure to benchmark the numbers against past losing efforts. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to distinguish operational issues from emotional ones. We're losing, this sucks. As a result of this circulatory system of fan feedback, the 49ers team's satisfaction scores kept going up. Fans got in and out of the stadium faster. They bought more concessions in the stadium. They enjoyed cleaner bathrooms. They were happier. The boulder was moving. 2. Let's rewind the 49ers story. The leader's goal was to boost fans' enjoyment of the team's games. In pursuit of that goal, which leverage points could be targeted? The team decided to tackle small problems and nuisances that might sour a fan's experience: dirty bathrooms, warm wine, unstocked concessions, and so on. Then, to act on those leverage points, the team needed to restack resources. And the resource that made a difference in this case was not motivation, it was information. Armed with real-time data, the team's staffers could fix a multitude of problems while the game was still going on. That's what this chapter is all about: making quicker progress by virtue of accelerating learning. To accelerate learning is to address 2 fundamental questions. The first is, how quickly can you identify failure? I'll leave you in suspense about the second question until a bit later. The 49ers shrunk that gap from days between games to minutes. Notice that shrinking that lag time, the time needed to spot failure, also involves a reduction in waste. If you think about it, the 49ers story is similar to the story of the Ashboro trash trucks from Chapter 7. Before the happy or not terminals were installed, the 49ers staffers had to patrol every bathroom, looking for the dirty ones, in the same way that the bulk trash trucks had to roll down every block, hunting for abandoned futons and fridges. But once the terminals were in place during the games, providing real-time feedback, those routes stopped operating by happenstance. Workers could go straight to where help was needed. That's no accident. There's an organic link between these threads of faster learning and reduced waste. They tend to twine together. Because learning involves recalibration, do more of this, do less of that. That recalibration, learning to shift your efforts toward more valuable pursuits, is the same thing as reducing waste. And it feels better, too, more motivating to the people involved. Moon Javed said his team appreciated having the richer feedback. I'm asking for things to get better, and that tends to lead to asking people to do more work, he said. But in this situation, it was actually heartwarming. I sat down with a manager after the first couple of weeks and he said, I love this because I have information that actually helps me to do my job. The right information in the right moment is the ultimate navigational aid. 3. Learning faster does not necessitate more technology or even more data. Sometimes it's just about seeking the right source of feedback. Remember Tom Chi? He's the innovation expert from Chapter 1 who talked about how decisions are usually made by guess-a-thons. Years ago, he was approached by a multi-billion-dollar global energy management company, let's call it Schmidt, that had a problem retaining executives. The company had been losing 70% of its top executives, on average, every 3 years. Chi learned that Schmidt was organized in a decentralized fashion, with each country run by its own CEO, so that each region could be served more nimbly. Those CEOs were replaced every 3 to 4 years in order to maintain a constant stream of new ideas. And about 2 years into a CEO's term, they were expected to start succession planning for the person who would replace them in the next cycle. These choices apparently gave Schmidt what it was looking for, lots of innovation and an antidote to complacency. But there was a costly side effect. Around the time when a particular CEO's successor was named, the executives who were passed over tended to depart. How could Schmidt do a better job retaining those passed over executives? The company's leaders had developed 5 proposals, which they shared with Chi to seek his feedback. Chi recalled, in a talk posted online, what happened next. Chi, what happened when you tried these proposals out? Schmidt, oh, we didn't try these out yet. Chi, okay. That's a lot of work to not try. Did you just come up with these? Did you not have time to do it yet? Schmidt, Tom, I don't think you understand. This is really serious business. If we execute the wrong retention program, we might lose our top executives. Laughter in room. The leaders had been agonizing over these proposals for months, but they hadn't really done anything yet. They were stuck in guess-a-thons. So Chi challenged them to tap a new source of feedback, their own executives. Facing a room full of Schmidt's top leaders, from different countries around the world, Chi staged a role play. He pulled over a table and invited the CEO of Brazil to sit there. This is your desk, Chi said. Then Chi invited up another executive, pretend you're the coup of Brazil. You've been called in to meet with the CEO. You're excited because you think this might be the meeting where you get named the successor. Chi went back to the CEO of Brazil and said, what's gonna happen is he's not gonna get the job, but you're gonna tell him about this amazing executive exchange program. The exchange program was one of Schmidt's ideas for improving retention. The pitch was, basically, okay, you didn't get named the next CEO, but we really value your abilities, so we're going to swap you from Brazil to, say, Egypt, where you can join the team for a few years, solve some problems for them, and come back a hero. The program was a well-intentioned consolation prize. So the role play begins. The coup enters the CEO's office. They shake hands and sit. The CEO cautiously and politely reveals that the coup will not be the successor, then pitches him on the executive exchange program. At first, the coup keeps a poker face. Then concern sprouts. His brow furrows. A few minutes into the conversation, he pushes back from the table, saying, "That's enough. I've heard enough. Look, I've been a professional for over 20 years, I've been an executive for over 12 years. I understand sometimes you get the promotion, sometimes you don't. But now what you're telling me is in order to continue to have a great career at Schmidt, I need to pull my kids out of school, convince my wife to move to a country where we don't even speak the language, work with a team I've never even met once, and abandon the team. That, to your credit, is one of the best operational teams in all of Schmidt. You are crazy. I quit." The exchange program had been Schmidt's favorite idea for a retention program. Then, within a few minutes of a role play, they figured out the idea was a dog. How? By putting themselves in a situation where they could learn. Discussing the idea internally was not learning, it was one of Kai's guess-a-thons. But trying out the idea with people who were similar to the target audience, that's learning. Imagine how long this charade could have continued absent Kai's involvement. It's possible that they would have debated it until eventually they talked themselves into rolling it out, investing millions in the program. Infrastructure, training the regions in how it worked, making plans for the relocations, and so forth. They could have spent years building out this terrible program before they realized it was terrible. Accelerating learning allows you to limit and even prevent wasteful efforts. 4. How quickly can you identify failure? The 49ers accelerated learning by deploying an army of happy or not terminals. Schmidt accelerated learning by trying a role play with the right audience. This same transformation shrinking the time needed to surface failure happened on a larger scale in the software industry over the last few decades. Until the 1990s, most software was developed using what's called the waterfall approach. It's called waterfall in tribute to the linear, cascading flow of the project stages. There are countless reasons why the waterfall approach didn't work. People are lousy at estimating how long it will take to do something, the so-called planning fallacy. As a result, the projects were usually egregiously behind the schedule. Old heads will remember that major OS releases, such as Windows, frequently seemed to take years longer than expected. 3. Waterfall also encouraged long periods of slack until the team got into crisis mode close to the deadline, akin to a college student who waits until the night before to write the 10-page term paper. But the fundamental problem with Waterfall was that many teams did not get substantive feedback from actual customers until late in the development cycle, which might be years. That was a fatal flaw. Because sometimes you got to the end of the cycle ready to ship software only to get a nasty surprise. I see this happen all the time. A company will spend years on a project that seemed like a good idea when the workers started on it, but by the time they cross the finish line, the market has fundamentally changed, said Jeff and J.J. Sutherland in the book Scrum. As a result, waterfall as a methodology has mostly disappeared. The new norm, Agile, is structured around accelerated learning. The waterfall question was, how long will it take us to build this set of features that we think the customers want? By contrast, the Agile question is, what are the most valuable features we could build in the next 2 weeks? These short cycles are called sprints and their length varies, but they are denominated in weeks, not years. You build a little, test it, get feedback, build a little more, and so on. Because it's iterative, there's little chance of a product unveiling where the customer says, "No, this is garbage, this is not what I need at all." Because you've been in touch with them all along. The customer's voice is connected to your operations via a reliable feedback loop. Let's get back to the first question of accelerating learning: how quickly can you identify failure? With Waterfall, it might take years. With Agile, it would take weeks or, at worst, a few months. But Agile is not just a failure detection methodology. It's also about unlocking improvements. And that brings us to the second key question of accelerating learning: how quickly can you spot potential successes? Because when you understand your customers better, and when you observe how they use your products, you can also spot opportunities. Learning is not just about avoiding or minimizing failure, it's about Maximizing success. To see how these two goals can intersect, consider Eric Newsom's work at National Public Radio, NPR. Newsom took inspiration from Agile principles when, in 2011, he was put in charge of programming. He was charged with developing a slate of promising new shows. The time was ripe for innovation. NPR had a stable of popular programs, such as the Saturday morning favorite Car Talk, but there was a weak pipeline of up-and-coming shows that might become hits. NPR's programming was in danger of aging out. Traditionally, developing shows had been a labor-intensive, costly, and slow proposition. The network would hatch a new show idea, incubate it slowly and secretly pour millions of dollars into its development, find a star to be the host, then unveil it a year or two later to great fanfare. And then they would wait even more months and years to see whether the show was a hit or a flop. Sound familiar? That's essentially the waterfall model. So, challenged with cultivating a crop of new shows, Newsom requested millions of dollars to fund development. He got zero. So I can't do it the old way, he said. I started asking myself questions about how I can short-circuit parts of this process. Newsom cobbled together a new development process, a quick and dirty one. Now, when someone came up with a promising idea for a show, they'd start working on a paper pilot. Instead of investing enormous resources in producing pilots' inaugural episodes of a new show, Newsom's idea was, why don't we do some futzing around on paper first, before we start recording anything? The paper pilot asked a lot of basic questions. What would happen in the first few episodes of this show? What kinds of guests would we invite, and where would we find them? What recurring features would we have on the show? The paper pilot provided an immediate payoff. It helped to detect underbaked ideas. Many times people have ideas for podcasts or radio shows that sound great, said Newsom. And then once you actually say, okay, let's sketch out what 3 episodes of this would look like, you realize it's not really a series. It's an episode. It's 1 hour of good material, really. The paper pilot also allowed the team to practice collaborating. Sometimes the results could be surprising. At one point, the team had gotten excited about a show centered on food. For the host role, they had recruited an editor of a prestigious food magazine. She seemed perfect. They started drafting the paper pilot, working alongside the editor, only to discover that she was just kind of a diva and was not fun to work with and was very immediately dismissive of ideas, said Newsom. The staff was actively trying to avoid her. The feedback from the paper pilot, then, allowed them to turn a long, drawn-out debacle into a quick and disposable trial. How quickly can you identify failure? He captured the spirit of his new approach with an analogy. The historical way we developed shows was to take a pack of tomato seeds and spread them out on the table. And everyone would argue about which seed was going to be the one that germinated and had the most fruit. Together they would crown the most promising seed. Then, they would pour massive resources into it and everyone would sit there and wring their hands to see if it sprouted and if it bore fruit and how much fruit, he said. The flaw with this process is clear. A gardener will tell you to plant a bunch of different seeds because half of them aren't even going to germinate, he said. And the ones that do germinate, some are going to be all twisted and messed up and never really develop to the right size, and only a small number of them will develop fruit. To develop tomatoes, get really great tomatoes, you have to start with a bunch of different seeds. One word of caution here, Newsom's analogy is not an argument for self-disempowerment. I can't possibly know anything about what will succeed, so I might as well toss a bunch of random seeds into the ground and see what happens. That's not what he's saying. Newsom and his team knew an enormous amount about what made shows succeed. They could probably dismiss 90% of their show ideas out of hand, just based on their accumulated experience. The point is that for the remaining 10%, there was no reason to guess about which one would fare best. Just plant the seeds. To get back to Newsom's analogy, you want to start with the best seeds from the best growers, and use the best soil and fertilizer, and then let nature take its course. Testing is a replacement for guessing, not a replacement for judgment. So Newsom started with multiple seeds. Some of those initial ideas made it to the paper pilot stage. Some of the paper pilots were promising enough that a real pilot was taped. Some of those pilots were strong enough that a full season was funded. And some of those shows became hits. Mega hits, in fact. Some of those tomato seeds turned into TED Radio Hour, Ask Me Another, Hidden Brain, and Invisibilia. Some of the biggest radio and podcasting successes of the past 20 years. 5. How quickly can you identify failure? How quickly can you spot potential successes? Newsom's agile-inspired approach answered both questions. It revealed failures more quickly, as with the cooking show. And it also managed to incubate good ideas more quickly, by giving more seeds the opportunity to thrive without breaking the budget. The 49ers, too, actually learned to use the incoming data to spot opportunities as well as failures. In studying the visualizations of the concession stands, Moon Javed looked for anomalies. Maybe there would be one red dot, an underperforming stand, right in between two green dots, thriving stands. Given that data, he'd know that the problem with the red dot wasn't the location, it was the concept. At the end of every season, we would replace all those red dots with new concepts. For example, we could try a chicken tenders concept that might resonate with fans, he said. And this tinkering with red dots worked. When they swapped out a stand, the average improvement was about 15%. We've come full circle, then, to the beginning of the book. Because those red dots, for Javed, were basically an invitation to find a new leverage point. A new idea for change that would improve the fans' experience. The book's framework, finding leverage points and restacking resources, is usually iterative. For you identify a priority and then you push on it. If it doesn't go the way you hoped, you learn from the experience. Maybe there's a better direction to push. The 49ers used data to learn how to deploy their staffers' time more effectively. Or maybe you identify a better priority. At NPR, planting multiple seeds allowed them to invest in more promising shows. Quick adaptation is the ultimate force multiplier. If we aspire to get unstuck and make progress on what matters, we must accelerate our learning. Coincidentally, this is also the exact sequence of emotions you experience every season. As a Carolina Panthers fan, too, it's worth remarking on the fact that, when you make it incredibly easy for people to give you useful feedback, you get more of it. Just smash one button on the way out of the bathroom. It's the polar opposite of those "how was your flight" surveys that manage to sprawl across 16 sold editing screens. Item 118, on a scale of 1 to 7, how would you assess the flight attendant's posture? 3 Windows 95, for instance, was delayed multiple times, but when it finally launched, it at least came with a proper release. Jay Leno hosted the launch party. Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry from Friends did a promo video. The Rolling Stones, trailblazing a new low for rock sellouts, licensed Start Me Up. For usually, but not always. And I think this is an important nuance. Personally, I do not believe that all change needs to be iterative, in the spirit of methodologies such as continuous improvement. Sometimes it's enough simply to step from one plateau to a better one. You lose 10 pounds and then you hold at the new weight. Or, to revisit the ExxonMobil Technical Data Center story, you and your team do a burst to whittle down some towering piles of unarchived files. Sometimes positive change is a one-off, you do it, and it's done. The system is fixed. That's still a reset. And those changes are well worth fighting for. Whirlwind Review, Chapter 11, Accelerate Learning. 1. The sixth and final way to restack resources on your leverage points is to accelerate your learning. The faster you can learn, the faster you can go. 2. The first question of accelerating learning is, how quickly can you identify failure? When the 49ers deployed the Happy or Not terminals around the stadium, the real-time data helped them send staffers directly to the trouble spots, thus preventing more customer dissatisfaction. Before using the terminals, it would have taken a week, not minutes, to adapt. 3. Useful feedback helps you align resources with goals. That tight calibration cuts waste, which is one of the key themes of restacking. The 49ers story is similar to the Ashboro truck's tale in Chapter 7 on recycling waste. The right information lets workers go directly to where their help was most needed. For learning faster doesn't necessarily demand more data or technology. Sometimes it hinges on seeking out the people best equipped to give feedback. At Schmidt, leaders had dreamed up an exchange program as a consolation prize for executives who were not named regional CEOs. But they learned quickly that the program was a dog when Tom Chi had the sense to test it out with a group of senior executives. 5. The second question of accelerating learning is, how quickly can you spot potential successes? I noticed that the innovation of agile development answered both questions. It helped teams spot failure quicker by speeding up the development cycles, but it also helped them spot successes by bringing them closer to the customer's voice. At NPR, Eric Newsom stopped trying to pick the best tomato seed. Instead, he created a method for testing multiple show concepts at once, more akin to planting multiple seeds and seeing which ones grew. This allowed more shows a chance to thrive. 6. The right information in the right moment is the ultimate navigational aid. If we want to. Conclusion. 1. In 2018, Wania Regina Malo Baya, a nurse and director at a major hospital in Sao Paulo, Brazil, needed a final project for her training program. She had been part of a cohort, led by Jessica Perlo at the IHI, that was dedicated to instilling joy at work. The cohort had been studying the question, how do you create a joyful, engaged workforce? In healthcare, that could be a difficult mission. In many places around the world, the sector was characterized by staff burnout, high turnover, and low morale. Similar problems affected Baya's employer, Hospital Sírio-Libanês, one of Brazil's most respected healthcare institutions. Put yourself in Baya's shoes. You want to lead a project that will actually lift your colleagues' engagement and happiness at work. That's an ambitious goal. That's a boulder. How do you move it? Well, you know the answer by now. You find a leverage point and you restack resources on it. Baya's approach provides a nice opportunity to review the full scope of what we've explored in the book. First, let's dive into the story without constant authorial interruptions, and then we'll circle back and map her efforts to the book's framework. In her training cohort, Baya had been introduced to the IHI's model of joy at work, which included 9 independent factors, ranging from wellness and resilience to camaraderie and teamwork to recognition and rewards. Of these 9 factors, there was one in particular that popped out for Baya: participative management, meaning that workers are given a voice in their work and allowed the opportunity to co-produce joy. That factor was a particular pain point for Hospital Sírio-Libanês. In a recent survey of critical care staffers, only 40% had agreed with the statement, "I participate in local decisions that affect my work." Baya thought if she could move that number, it would make a powerful difference. So she hatched an idea for a project, What Matters to You, and pitched it to her colleagues, from administrators to nurses to physical therapists. I felt it was important for me to be 100% honest with them, so whenever they would ask me, "Is this going to work?" I would say, "I have no idea if this is going to work," said Baya. We held hands and jumped right in. Under her plan, staffers were asked to consider, what makes a good day? What makes you proud to work here? When we are at our best, what does that look like? They were asked to write their answers on sticky notes and post them on a public bulletin board. At the same time, they were asked, what are the impediments to what matters? That is, what are the organizational obstacles to experiencing more of a sense of purpose? More sticky notes were added, reflecting those blockers. Soon, the board overflowed with gripes, complaints, and barriers. Samples: there's no team spirit among colleagues, it's everyone for themselves, the schedule on the weekend is rough, the coffee machine never works on the night shift. When I got to the board and saw 300 post-its, for instance, I thought to myself, what the heck? Where was I that I didn't see all these demands before? Said Nilda Rosa de Oliveira Prado, a colleague of Baya's. Over a few weeks, the response to both prompts what matters to you and what blocks the things that matter, proliferated until the whole board was crammed. Baya and Prado knew they couldn't stop there. Otherwise the gripes would just form a wailing wall, as Prado said, and that wasn't the spirit of the exercise. So they grouped the impediments into themes, prioritizing the themes that were cited most often. The biggest gripe, by far, was the way workers were scheduled. That was a thorny issue. But not all of the complaints were so big and systemic. The seventh most popular theme covered frustrations about the coffee machine. After the top frustrations were identified, the staffers organized themselves into teams, all voluntary, by theme, to offer recommendations to mitigate or eliminate the impediments. Baya and her colleagues encouraged them to think in terms of quick wins. What's something we can do right away in our area to make progress on this? Like, within 24 hours? These were mostly stone in the shoe issues, small issues that, if resolved, would deliver a lot of relief. The key word being resolved. Baya had done careful advance work to make sure that the hospital's senior leaders were ready to say yes to all reasonable requests. No delays, no bureaucracy, no instinctive resistance. If we're going to invite people to identify problems and do the actual work of resolving them, then we've got to get out of their way and let them drive. Some of the issues were addressed quickly. The coffee machine got replaced. A recognition tree was added to provide a place to honor staffers. By popular demand, a closet was dedicated to each shift, morning, afternoon, and night, to provide space for clothes to change into, for instance, so they could watch the World Cup games in proper team attire. Not all of the issues were so easy. Scheduling, in particular, was a bear. The existing model was baked deep into the systems of the hospital. Many staffers worked 6 six-hour days, with a day off on the 7th day. A substantial contingent of them lobbied for 3 12-hour shifts, scheduled every other day, to allow for rest. The administrators were skeptical. In the past, the idea would have simply been vetoed. This time, though, it was tested. A group of nurses tried the 3 12-hour shifts and it proved popular not only with the nurses but also, unexpectedly, with their patients. The patients liked getting to spend more time with the same nurse. It provided more continuity. They didn't have to repeat all their issues to a new staffer every 6 hours. On the strength of the positive outcomes from the testing, the new 12-hour shift schedule, which had initially seemed radical, became the new norm. The other tests conducted by the working groups were similarly successful. More than 93% of the ideas that they tested were ultimately implemented. As Baya's project continued, its progress was carefully monitored. The trackability of participative management had been one of the things that attracted her to the concept. One of the working groups concocted a simple guerrilla idea for making progress visible. Medical and support staffers, after concluding a shift, were asked to choose either an orange or a white ping-pong ball. A white ball signified this was a collaborative and participatory shift. An orange ball signified the opposite. The person would drop the ball they'd chosen into a transparent community bin, that's the empty bin on the right below. As a result, you could look at the community bin, stuffed with balls, and quickly get a feel for how the day had gone. In the beginning of the effort, orange balls outnumbered white ones, but as the days rolled on, white came to dominate. Everybody could see, this is working. Baya and her colleagues used the rigor of continuous improvement to monitor the change. They tracked the percentage of employees who agreed with this statement: I participate in local decisions that affect my work. The results were striking. The number of employees who agreed with that statement vaulted up from 40% to 69% within 6 months of the start of the project. And the number stayed high. 2 years after the pilot project, it had reached 72%. As Baya had predicted, this success making employees feel heard and listened to had ripple effects. In employee surveys, numbers were up over 10 percentage points on feelings of respect, camaraderie, pride, and more. Retention improved. Even patient outcomes improved. the number of adverse events declined substantially. This stunning success created its own momentum with Hospital Sierra-Lebane's. Other groups within the hospital rushed to embrace the same game plan. By 2021, it had been rolled out across the hospital. Then leaders from other hospitals came calling, wanting to import the idea to their own organizations. Baia organized a cohort of hospitals across Brazil to learn from her successful efforts to create joy at work. I have always wanted to see all healthcare professionals become more of the protagonists in the system, as opposed to them being invisible, said Baia. When your employees are consulted, they will contribute. When they are empowered, they will act. When they are trusted, they will lead. 2. Now let's zoom out for a minute. I absolutely love this story for 2 reasons. First, it's immediately practical. There is nothing hospital or Brazil specific about this example. You can adopt a similar methodology with your own team. Just steal this game plan. Second, the story provides a great chance to review the lessons of the book. I'll point to some different aspects of the story and remind you what those moments are illustrating. Let's start with the way Baia targeted the issue of participative management. That's a classic example of selecting a leverage point. You can't do everything, but you can do something. Make it a well-chosen something. How did she select this particular leverage point? Partly it was a story of finding the bright spots. The IHE's model of joy at work came from distilling the best work of different health systems. This is reminiscent of the Million Cat Challenge and how Kate Hurley discovered the bright spot of return to field at the Jacksonville shelter. The participative management leverage point was attentive to the constraints of the hospital, since the lack of agency was holding employees back. And it reflected Baia's belief that participative management was a hidden lever that could influence many others. Map the system. Having identified participative management as a leverage point, how did Baia begin to restack resources? Well, remember, she asked the staffers, what matters to you? The entire project was architected to resolve exactly the things that employees said they cared about. That's tapping motivation, of course. Remember this Venn diagram. This was Baia's strategy. After identifying the staff's top frustrations, the factors that interfered with the things that mattered most to them, Baia let them volunteer to tackle those issues personally. They were put in charge, the change channeled their ideas and their leadership, and the hospital executives tried to say yes as much as possible. Let people drive. The project started with a flurry of work, bulletin boards full of sticky notes, and quickly assembled teams. Start with a burst. The bins of ping-pong balls provided an easy way for the staff to get feedback on how the effort was going, and allowed the team to share a common view of the progress they were making. Accelerate learning. That progress created its own momentum. It was the proof that change was happening, that people were being listened to, which was motivating. That's the progress principle. The core leverage point: improving employee sentiment on the statement, I participate in local decisions that affect my work, had ripple effects, just as Baia had predicted. Feelings of respect and pride went up. Retention improved. These ripple effects are not lucky or accidental, they're the intended result of finding a leverage point. A leverage point is a place where a little investment can make a big difference. And note that Baia and her colleagues made all this happen without receiving an influx of new resources or new staff or new benefits. Instead, they sharpened their goals and reallocated their resources to serve those goals. That's our 2-part framework in action. 3. Baia and her colleagues reset the culture at Hospital Sierra-Lebane's. Probably all of us can take inspiration from a success like that, but somehow, when it comes to changing our own organizations, we think, well, that could never happen here. We're worn down by past failed efforts, or demoralized by the difficulty of playing politics or overcoming bureaucracy. Sometimes we adopt a defeatist attitude: it will take an emergency before anything changes around here. And to be fair, that's partly right. People do change quickly in response to emergencies. Look at humanity's response to COVID. Health systems were reimagined, schools went remote, businesses overhauled supply chains, Vaccines were developed, massive government programs were hatched and rolled out, all in a matter of months. For a less extreme example, in June 2023, a tanker truck carrying gasoline exploded beneath an I-95 overpass in Philadelphia, melting the metal support beams and causing the bridge to collapse onto the highway, rendering the highway impassable. Experts predicted it would take months before the road could be restored, and as a result, the economic consequences would be dire. Since I-95 is a critical transportation artery. Nope. 12 days later, traffic was flowing. The ingenious improvised solution involved building a temporary column that could support the overpass, allowing traffic to flow even as the permanent reconstruction was underway. The column was filled with 8,000 cubic yards, 36,000 wheelbarrows full, of foamed glass aggregate, made partly from recycled beer bottles. When the job was complete, all the Philadelphia sports team mascots rode together in a fire truck over the newly opened overpass. The governor threw a party for the construction workers. So, yes, when people are forced to change, their capacity for change is vast. But let's not forget there's another option: people can choose to change. This book was full of situations where people chose to change. No emergency forced their hand. Quick progress happened at the radiology clinic described in Chapter 5. A team was assembled with a charter to make things run better, and they made it happen. The receptionist started giving out oral contrast, the technologists stopped chaperoning the patients, and patient flow was improved dramatically. There was no emergency. Change was a choice. And they vaulted forward in 5 days. Quick progress happened with Guy Kruger, the archery coach. Chapter 10. Frustrated with his poor relationships with athletes, he went looking for answers and embraced a new coaching philosophy that let athletes drive. There was no emergency. Change was a choice. And his career thrived as a result. Quick progress happened at Chick-fil-A. Chapter 4. The team members pursued bottleneck after bottleneck, speeding up the drive-through and breaking their own records for flow. There was no crisis. Change was a choice. And month after month, they kept getting better. Quick progress happened throughout this book. The team in the hospital receiving area started delivering packages within a day. The technical data center group at ExxonMobil triumphed over its mountain of unarchived files. The client partners at Gartner reversed the company's sliding customer retention numbers. 49ers games got better. Church services got shorter. Millions of cats were saved. A final father and son game of ping pong was played. There was no emergency that compelled action in any of these situations. They were choices. When we manage to budge the boulder, it serves us on 2 distinct levels. We, by definition, make progress toward our goals, which is remarkable enough. But, beyond that, as we witness ourselves moving, we simultaneously reassure ourselves that we're capable of moving. We're not stuck. Not wheel spinning. Not bogged down. Not stymied. Not paralyzed. Not depressed. Not defeated. We're rolling forward. And what could feel better than making progress towards something that matters? It occurs to me that this is the 4th appearance of sticky notes in the book. 1. The batching exercise in the hospital receiving area. 2. Sticky note appreciations. 3. Genius swap. And 4. This work in Brazil. I think/hope this is coincidence and that successful change does not, in fact, depend on scraps of paper with light adhesive. That said, this could be a business opportunity. If you work at 3M, contact me about securing naming rights.